Chapter 141, Gudong. The great Tianshu warship emerged through the haze like a soaring citadel, a floating fortress more than 10,000 feet long. It glided above the sea of clouds, its hull bathed in unbroken streams of divine light. Along its sides, innumerable array inscriptions pulsed with spiritual energy, each one guiding and amplifying the ship's power. The moment the warship appeared, every eye in the sky congregation snapped toward it. Yet the stunned silence that followed had nothing to do with the vessel's immense size or its dazzling lights. What truly left even the most seasoned monks agape was the sight on its deck. More than 700 Emperor-level cultivators stood in perfect formation, each exuding the unmistakable aura of a sovereign who had broken through to the Emperor realm. They were arranged with military precision, pillars in a fearsome killing array designed to crush any opponent. Behind them loomed even more terrifying figures, giants who had attained the Emperor realm themselves. In the entire pantheon of the 4 major divine dynasties, fewer than 20 such titans ever stood united. Yet here they all were, arrayed on this single warship, lending it an air of invincibility. At the very center of the formation stood a lone figure whose presence drew every glance. He wore simple white robes that rippled in the high-altitude wind. Calm and composed, he surveyed the gathering below with keen, calculating eyes. This was Ye Cheng, young prodigy and commander of the Tianshu warship. A ripple of whispers ran through the assembly at Ye Cheng's appearance. None could deny the uncanny strength radiating from him, strength that seemed to match, if not surpass, the ancient giants flanking him. As the warship drifted closer, its massive keel cutting through the clouds, it became clear that this was no mere display of power. It was the harbinger of a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of the martial world. The colossal warriors in the Divine Emperor's service are little more than elite lieutenants. Formidable, yes, but barred from entering the heart of the killing array. Over 100 of them stand in patient ranks around its perimeter, each at an assigned station. Only those titans who have reached the Saint Emperor realm may step onto the central platform, where they each oversee a portion of the array. Though they refrain from unleashing their full aura, their mere presence is enough to keep both armies in check. No one dares make a reckless move, lest they draw the wrath of those Saint Emperor in the skies above. Yet even the sight of nearly 1,000 emperors gathered into this living fortress holds the combatants' attention only briefly. Whether it's the despairing monks of Divine Dream Imperial City, Meng Linger and her brethren, or the triumphant coalition forces pressing their advantage, all eyes soon snap back to the fierce struggle unfolding on the ground. The killing array may loom over them, but it is the clash at their feet that will decide their fate. All eyes turn skyward to the observation platform looming above the Tianshu battlefield. There, a woman clad in gleaming silver armor stood at the forefront, 9 others arrayed behind her like stars encircling the moon. Though none of the 10 could step inside the killing array itself, each breath they drew released a faint yet unmistakable pulse of power. Down below, every cultivator felt it. That barely perceptible aura was more than enough to shatter the massive formation, nearly 1,000 warriors strong, including hundreds of god emperors and scores of saint emperors. One single exhalation from any of those 10 could collapse even a supreme emperor-level killing array. In that moment, the entire battlefield fell into an eerie hush. Since the moment the Tianshu warship had appeared overhead, not a single voice had pierced the air, not even that of the silver-armored woman leading the group. And yet, on both sides of the field, fighters still proclaimed their cultivation realms in their minds. A silent roar of defiance echoing across the void. Venerable. Not just venerables, but supreme titans who've perfected the venerable realm or soared beyond it. How on earth could such cultivators appear here, in the heart of the Shenmeng dynasty? Perhaps they're merely passing through. On the coalition's side, even the once confident Chongshan Emperor stood frozen, his certainty of victory shattered. Doubts and dread swirled in his mind. He dared not make a move for fear of provoking these towering presences drifting through the sea of clouds. Yet neither he nor his generals had the slightest clue whether these newcomers supported their cause or the enemy's. Far below, in the imperial city of Shenmeng, Queen Meng Linger and her court watched in equal bewilderment, speculating on the stranger's intentions. High above on the Tianshu warship, however, there was only one person giving this spectacle any real attention. Clad in shimmering silver armor, Longshuan Tianzu, one of the 9 exalted Tianzun of Tianshu Pavilion, dismissed the onlookers' fears with a mere flicker of her will. Within moments, she had mapped every movement on the battlefield. As a final courtesy, she confirmed that Shen Meng's queen, Meng Linger, remained perfectly safe. Longshuan Tianzun let her gaze linger over Meng Linger's long, jade-like legs and her delicate, enchanting face. Even someone of Longshuan's own renown couldn't help but nod with a mix of envy and understanding. Envy, because Meng Linger enjoyed the favor of her pavilion master, a privilege that had already paved her path to becoming queen. Understanding, because it was clear Meng Linger possessed genuine merits that earned her such high esteem. With a slight shake of her head, Longshuan withdrew her divine perception and turned coolly to the Chongshan Divine Emperor, who had just spoken. Her expression remained unreadable as she addressed him in a calm, measured tone. "You've come all the way here to destroy the Shenmeng dynasty. No doubt you've heard His Highness Ye Cheng's name more than once, yet you march forward regardless." A ripple of reaction swept through the assembled cultivators. The Chongshan Emperor himself paused, brow furrowed. "Is that so?" he asked. Ah, one of his attendants stammered, unsettled by Longshuan's calm certainty. The silence that followed crackled with excitement. His Highness Ye Cheng? Could these imposing reinforcements truly have been summoned by Gu Ye Cheng of the Shenmeng dynasty? It seemed impossible, yet the mere suggestion sent every heart racing with anticipation. He was nothing more than a cultivator of the Shenmeng dynasty. How could he presume to stand alongside such venerable giants? Emperor Chongshan's heart pounded in terror, but when he sensed the iciness of Longshuan Tianzun's tone and felt that overwhelming aura bearing down on him, he could no longer pretend ignorance. Swallowing hard, his voice quivering, he managed, "Yes, that's true, but—" Crack! Under the stunned eyes of the onlookers, Longshuan Tianzun lifted his hand and delivered a single palm strike. Even cultivators of the Tianzun realm could only delay its impact for an instant. Emperor Chongshan's dantian and sea of consciousness ruptured outright. His body froze mid-breath, and then all life fled from him. Behind him, the other allied giants and the elite warriors at their backs watched in horrified silence as the Emperor's corpse hit the ground in a crimson splatter. "He's dead?" They stared in disbelief at the motionless form of the Divine Emperor of Chongshan, killed before he could even finish his sentence. The allied monks, who had secretly clung to a 1 in 10,000 chance that Longshuan Tianzun was merely passing through, were now utterly desperate. When the cold, unyielding gaze of Longshuan Tianzun and the towering figures of the Tianshu Pavilion's giants behind him fell upon them, they recoiled in panic. There was nowhere to run, trapped beneath the vast hull of the Tianshu warship. Even Divine Emperor Titans and king-ranked warriors were no more than helpless ants. One by one, they were cut down before they could mount so much as a single defense. "Master," cried an emperor-ranked monk, his voice trembling, "even if we have grievously offended His Majesty Ye Cheng, we are willing to surrender. We were only following orders. Must we all be slaughtered?" "His Majesty's followers?" Longshuan Tianzun finally spoke, his tone frosty. "You, his followers?" He said no more, but the Tianshu Pavilion masters arrayed behind him needed no prompting. Sneers of contempt curled their lips as they watched the remaining coalition monks break and cower under their gaze, the grim business of extermination resuming without mercy. "Don't flatter yourselves, just because you bear the title of emperor. Be you a god emperor or a saint emperor, you pale in comparison to His Majesty Gu Ye Cheng." The master's voice rang out, his gaze drifting to Longshuan Tianzun. At Longshuan's approving nod, he wasted no time. With a grand flourish, he commanded the winds. "Hualala!" The unexpected roar of power silenced every cultivator on the grand stand. At the very center of the Tianshu warship's deck rose an immense mast, a 1,000-foot spine bone harvested from a venerable realm dragon, piercing the clouds above. From its summit unfurled a sable banner, the 2 characters Tianshu emblazoned across it in thick, decisive strokes. In that instant, every pair of eyes fixed upon it. Tianshu, could those towering figures really be from Tianshu Pavilion, the undisputed overlords of our Qianyu? Far below, within Shenmeng Imperial City, Meng Linger and the cultivators of the Shenmeng dynasty stared upward at the wind-whipped banner. Shock and awe glimmered in their expressions, yet nothing rattled them more than the cool, composed pronouncement that followed from Longshuan Tianzun the moment the flag caught the breeze. You never even noticed Lord Ye Cheng before, and now he's the pavilion master of the Tianshu Pavilion. Do you still believe yourselves worthy to serve under him? Are you truly fit to call yourselves his followers? Chapter 142, Silence descended over the battlefield. Longshuan Tianzun's words, uttered with icy calm, echoed through the ranks. The remaining coalition monks, once so arrogant, were now broken and desperate. One by one, they paid for their earlier atrocities in blood. By the time the last elite warrior fell, not a single foe remained standing. In that moment, the distant sky tore open with thunderous cracks. From those void rifts poured 3 overwhelming auras, like gaping chasms in the heavens. These newcomers, capable of crossing the void in their very flesh, was unmistakably of the Holy Emperor realm. The monks of the Shenmeng dynasty and the surrounding territories recognized the intruders at once. These were the dynasty's greatest legends, elder monsters whose names had been spoken in awe for thousands of years. Had they appeared even 15 minutes earlier, every cultivator here would have been paralyzed by terror. But now, after witnessing Longshuan Tianzun's merciless slaughter of the coalition's finest, a different emotion took hold: hope. After Longshuan at last announced Ye Cheng's true identity, that he was none other than the sitting pavilion master of Tianshu Pavilion, the entire hall went deathly quiet. Even Meng Linger, who had always admired Ye Cheng's extraordinary prowess, felt her jaw drop. As for the 3 allied holy emperors standing off to the side, their presence was utterly eclipsed, and who could fault them? Until this moment, even Meng Linger had only dared to compare Ye Cheng with the great titans of the late Saint Queen's age. At best, he matched a perfect Saint Emperor. She never dreamed he was also the overlord of Qianyu and head of the fabled Tianshu Pavilion. After all, the pavilion was the true powerhouse in these lands. Any one of its senior masters could topple the entire Shenmeng dynasty and subdue every neighboring force without breaking a sweat. Longshuan's voice rang out, cutting through the stunned silence. What's going on in Shenmeng Imperial City? Changshen said he'd surrounded Shenmeng Imperial City. What happened there? The 3 allied Saint Emperors had just stepped through the void rifts when they froze, staring in disbelief at the distant skyline. Surrounded? It sounded absurd, until terror snapped into focus. Is that the Tianshu warship? Though Changshen and his followers lacked detailed knowledge of the Tianshu Pavilion's inner workings, bound as they were by their own cultivation limits and comparatively short lifespans, these ancient immortals, some living 10 or even 20,000 years, needed no introduction. The pavilion's flagship hovered ominously above the city walls, its hull streaked with dark, congealed blood. Worse still, there was no sign of Changshan, Shen Huang, or their men. Even the slowest mind could grasp the truth. They'd walked into a fatal trap. "Fall back, now!" one emperor roared. Without hesitation, the 3 turned and charged for the void rifts they had torn open moments before. But before they could vanish, a single voice cut the air like a blade. "Since you've come all this way, there's no need to leave." From the shadows beneath the Tianshu banner stepped a venerable figure, lips curled in a cold smile. He raised one hand, and the very air quivered with his command, freezing the fleeing emperors in place. Crack! A stunned silence fell over the cultivators of the Shenmeng dynasty. In an instant, the venerable elder of the Tianshu Pavilion reached out and pinched the 3 allied Saint Emperors, each at the pinnacle of Saint Queen cultivation, right out of midair. Before they could even cry out, they were compressed by a torrent of spiritual energy, their bodies collapsing into 3 spheres of blood mist. Mouths agape, the onlookers could only swallow hard. As they stared at the calm, unruffled figure of the elder, their shock gave way to a profound awe. Even among legends, none had ever displayed such overwhelming power. Whispers spread like wildfire. This was no ordinary cultivator, but Ye Cheng himself. Meanwhile, far from the imperial heart, Longshuan Tianzun and his companions had just broken the siege around the capital. driving enemy forces into retreat. Almost at the same time, in Shenfeng City, a merciless struggle reached its bloody conclusion. After half a day of relentless combat, more than half of the Shenmeng dynasty's garrison lay defeated or slain. The dynasty's hopes, once pinned on sheer numbers, now teetered on the edge of collapse, shattered by a single, breathtaking display of mastery. Fewer than 30 cultivators had reached the imperial realm inside Shenfeng City, and only a few thousand king-level masters remained. Emperor Shiyu, the city's lord, stared anxiously at the ranks before him. "With our current numbers," he ground out, "even if we activate the city's protective formation, without fresh reinforcements, it won't hold more than 30 minutes. After that, the barrier will snap, and we'll be defenseless." He turned his gaze toward the observation tower beyond the walls. To his surprise, the attacking coalition had suffered even heavier losses than Shenfeng City. In the weeks of siege, both sides had lost emperors and kings, but Shenfeng's casualties were mostly wounded, and recoverable in 3 to 5 days. The coalition, by contrast, had lost over 20 emperors outright and thousands of kings in combat. And yet, despite such staggering losses, more than 1,000 kings and 2 to 3 dozen emperors, their overall strength still overwhelmingly outnumbered Shenfeng City's defenders. The delay did nothing to derail their next assault. From below the walls, a voice rang out. "Emperor Shiyu, have you made up your mind? Surrender now, and I'll see to it that you're granted the rank of concubine in my palace." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But if you refuse, once these gates fall, don't expect even a brazier to warm you, let alone any favors." Perched atop the battered ramparts, Shiyu stared down in despair. Then, almost as if he'd materialized from thin air, a figure in a flowing robe drifted into view before Shenfeng City. Leaning casually on his spear, he studied Shiyu with a predatory smile, his handsome features betrayed only by the hunger in his eyes. This was Yuan, crown prince of the Holy Elephant Dynasty, the greatest of the coalition's 4 powers. Though his innate talent for cultivation had never been remarkable, imperial favor and his dynasty's vast resources had carried him to the Xuanhuang realm. Secured by his father's unwavering support, Yuan's arrogance had only grown. Until now, he treated war and diplomacy alike as his personal playground. Ye Cheng had played a key role in the coalition's grand campaign to topple the Shenmeng dynasty, but not out of patriotism or political ambition. He'd thrown himself into the conflict for one reason alone: the current empress herself, the legendary Meng Linger, whose beauty had become the stuff of myths. Meanwhile, another name struck fear into the hearts of Shenmeng's enemies: Emperor Shiyu, the indomitable guardian of Divine Phoenix City. For more than a month, he and his Divine Dream cultivators had held the city under a relentless siege, so steadfast that they were hailed as the dynasty's Valkyries. So when Yuan, a Xuanhuang-level cultivator, brazenly appeared before the city walls and launched into a volley of taunts, the defenders' pride snapped. The Divine Dream warriors ground their teeth at the insult. Even Shiyu felt the fiery urge to lead a full-scale sortie. Better to charge out and die fighting than to be ground down by another wave of attackers. They braced themselves for that final, desperate battle, vowing never to endure such public humiliation again. Yet just as Shiyu raised his blade to signal the charge, title, reinforcements arrive, boom. Beyond the northern walls of Divine Phoenix City, 2 brilliant rainbows tore through the sky and converged above the gate. When they touched down, the very air shuddered with raw power, 2 concentrated shockwaves rippling outward like twin storms. Word race, D through the ranks. The last 2 divine emperors of the Divine Dream dynasty had answered the call. Emperor Lei and Emperor Yunxiao, he of whom had sworn himself to Meng Linger at the urging of Ye Cheng's name, had arrived to bolster the city's defense. "Emperor Lei, Emperor Yunxiao has come," someone shouted, and a roar of relief rolled over the battlements. Hope flared in every heart. With these 2 giants on our side and the protective formation still intact, we can hold out for another month, at least until His Majesty Ye Cheng himself returns. Faces that had been ashen with fatigue brightened in unison. From the ground, cultivators craned their necks to watch the 2 divine emperors stride across the ramparts, their presence alone seeming to steady the heavens. Behind them stood Emperor Shi Yutian, silent and unreadable. Lei and Yunxiao climbed to the highest parapet and scanned the encroaching army. Their eyes narrowed as they fixed on a solitary figure riding at its forefront, banners of the Holy Elephant Dynasty snapping in the wind. It was Crown Prince Che Yuan, and the deadly gleam in the Divine Emperor's eyes left no doubt of their intent. Emperor Lei's voice dropped to a low rumble. So the Crown Prince of the Holy Elephant Dynasty shows himself at last. As the distant war drums began their ominous cadence, Divine Phoenix City drew in a collective breath. Reinforcements had arrived, but the true battle, the one that would shape the fate of empires, was only just beginning. A mere Xuanhuang dares to be so arrogant beneath my Divine Phoenix City. The Thunder God Emperor's voice rang out, cold and unforgiving. He looked down at Ye Cheng as though he were already dead. Around them, the cultivators of the Divine Dream Dynasty, still smarting from being driven into the city by Ye Cheng, exchanged gleeful looks. They had long awaited their enemy's comeuppance. But the Thunder God Emperor's confidence wavered when he saw Ye Cheng remain perfectly calm, even amused. A faint, mocking smile lifted the young man's lips. "Thunder God Emperor," Ye Cheng said, his tone deceptively light. "What makes you so sure that two God Emperors can hold out another month? Your formation is already on the brink of collapse." He let the words settle over the stunned crowd. "And do you honestly believe that only the emperors of the Shenmeng dynasty will rush to your aid, while the rest of our coalition stands idly by?" A tense silence fell over Shenfeng City. The Shenmeng monks' faces drained of color, unsettled by his brazen implication. Then, as if answering Ye Cheng's challenge, the skies above cracked open with booming thunder. Boom! 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 From the rear of the allied army, the thunderous echoes of descending divine rainbows rolled across the plains. Each impact unleashed a staggering aura, far beyond the power of the Thunder God Emperor or the Cloud Xiao God Emperor. Though those two deities were formidable in their own right, they paled compared to the might of the divine emperors who now charged onto the field. Over 10 blazing arcs of light rained down, a clear sign that more than a dozen coalition figures, each at Divine Emperor caliber, had arrived to shore up the front lines. The defenders of the Divine Dream Dynasty, already reeling, stared incredulously as their situation darkened further. At the very edge of the battlefield, 2 gaping rifts tore open the void. Silently and bodily, 2 more powerhouse warriors strode through these tiers in space, descending to join the fray. 2 towering figures, Saint Emperors, had just taken their places at the head of the coalition's forces. Their very presence made the walls of Divine Phoenix City shiver as if struck by an earthquake. Shenmeng's monks, who only moments ago had been buoyed by the arrival of Emperors Lei Shen and Yunxiao, felt the blood drain from their faces. It was as though a bucket of ice water had been dumped over them. Outside the city gates, Crown Prince Che Yuan of the Xianxia Divine Dynasty watched their despair with amusement. He raised his voice just loud enough for the defenders to hear. "Emperor Shi Yu," he purred, "tell me, do you still want to die side by side with your little monks now that the real heavy hitters have arrived?" Inside Shenfeng City, Emperor Lei Shen's jaw clenched. Beside him, Yunxiao exchanged a worried glance with Shi Yu, their courage faltering under the prince's taunt. Then, in the span of a heartbeat, the air itself seemed to part. A red-robed Taoist swept onto the battlefield, appearing as suddenly as if he'd stepped through another world. He planted himself squarely between the 2 Saint Emperors, his robes billowing in an unfelt wind. Silence fell over the host as he lifted his chin and spoke, his voice perfectly calm yet carrying across the ranks like a clarion call. No one moved. No one spoke. All eyes were on the stranger in red, and on the 2 Saint Emperors who now hesitated in their tracks. "You have 24 hours to leave the Shenmeng dynasty." Chapter 143. A red-robed Taoist hovered serenely among the clouds, his calm eyes and even tone belying the tremendous power he wielded. His aura was locked down so tightly that, despite his sudden materialization, he failed to stir even the faintest ripple of spiritual energy across the sky. At first glance, he might have passed for any ordinary man, but no one in the assembled ranks was fooled. Only someone of exceptional cultivation could have slipped past 2 allied sacred emperors without warning. This red-robed figure was Saint Qiang, deputy pavilion master of Tianshu Pavilion, and one of the two contingents Ye Cheng had dispatched to save the Shenmeng dynasty. With scarcely more than a gentle breath, Saint Qiang addressed the allied commanders. His voice was soft, almost casual, yet carried the weight of absolute authority. Withdraw your forces from Shenmeng territory. There was no overt menace in his words, only the barest hint of a command, and yet it felt more imperious than any direct threat. The allied generals exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, one of them stepped forward, voice tight with indignation. Who does this presumptuous cultivator think he is? Does he not know his place? Still siding with the Shenmeng dynasty, even now? I don't care whether you're a secret Saint Emperor or reinforcements sent by Shenmeng. This alliance of four great dynasties will not be thwarted by one Saint Emperor. Crown Prince Che Yuan of Xianxia loomed ahead, his gaze icy as he addressed the Saint of the Blazing Sun, floating above. In Che Yuan's mind, Menglinger was out of reach, and soon Shi Yu, stationed in Shenfeng City, would be his prize. And now, just as victory neared, this unexpected old dog showed up to spoil everything. If not for the Saint Emperor's aura surrounding him, Che Yuan would have dismissed him outright. He sneered, abandoning all courtesy. Be sensible, fall back and bow out, or... Before he could finish, the Saint of the Blazing Sun, clearly annoyed, lifted a single finger. Bang! Che Yuan's threat vanished in an instant, in the stunned silence of the distant coalition monks, and even before the dozen god emperors and the two saint emperors who had rushed in to reinforce them, a single shaft of light sprang from Saint Qiang's brow. In an instant, it tore through Che Yuan's meridians, burning his consciousness and life force to ashes. Plop! With a hollow thud, Che Yuan's body collapsed to the ground, his vacant eyes staring up at the sky. The giants on the coalition side watched in horror, their pupils shrinking as they felt the overwhelming might of Saint Qiang's strike. The two Saint Emperors who stood closest exchanged looks of disbelief. They had assumed that the suddenly descending Saint Qiang was merely a peer from the Shenmeng dynasty, another Saint Emperor. Now it was clear his true cultivation must lie on a far loftier plane. Saint Qiang's voice remained steady, edged with the calm resignation of a warrior in his later years. It seems I've gone too long without making my presence known, so that some of you no longer recognize me. Those words fell like thunder among the coalition monks, igniting a tempest of awe and dread in every heart. The two Saint Emperor giants trembled in unison. One of them gasped, "Venerable One, so it's true, the newcomer is a supreme giant of the Venerable Realm." How could a Venerable Realm warrior suddenly manifest here in the heart of the Shenmeng dynasty? The other giant cried, eyes wide with shock and dread. They had never imagined the tide of battle could turn so swiftly. With Ye Cheng's arrival, all their painstaking gains, the four dynasties' coalition, the captured fortresses, the war machines, seemed to unravel in an instant. Even now, the allied forces still outnumbered the enemy and held a formidable array of emperors and giants, including 5 Saint Emperor Titans who had marched on the imperial city. Yet before this supreme warrior, they felt no more significant than ants under a boot. A palpable hush fell over the battlefield as Ye Cheng stood amid the ruins, his presence warping the very air. Wherever he placed a foot, scorched earth followed. Whoever met his gaze found their confidence withering. The combined might of the coalition, so carefully mustered over weeks of brutal warfare, could not withstand even a fraction of his power. The two giants exchanged a glance of despair. No stratagem, no alliance could withstand a true Venerable Realm ascendant. In that moment, victory slipped from their grasp. Venerable? Venerable? A ripple of terror ran through the coalition army. The Shenmeng dynasty has called in a Venerable as reinforcement. Monks from every allied sect froze on the battlefield, their hearts pounding in disbelief. Inside Shenfeng City, Shi Yu, the Yunxiao Divine Emperor, and the Thunder Divine Emperor likewise stared in shock. They had never imagined that their dire situation could be turned around so abruptly, yet here stood a figure whose power clearly eclipsed even that of the Saint Emperors. How had the Shenmeng dynasty managed to secure aid from someone at the venerable level? Shi Yu lowered his voice and addressed his fellow Divine Emperors. Do either of you know this senior? Yunxiao and the Thunder Divine Emperor exchanged a wry look. Smiling bitterly, They both shook their heads. A venerable was in an entirely different league. Before such a supreme cultivator, even their exalted Saint Emperor ranks might as well be ants. They had no illusions about ever earning his favor or attention. While everyone on both sides grappled with the sudden turn of events and wondered who this mysterious elder might be, the coalition forces had already lost all composure and fallen into outright panic. Once the coalition monks realized that Saint Xiang was truly a venerable realm powerhouse, supremely advanced even among the two Saint Emperors, their courage evaporated. The two emperors themselves fell to their knees, faces ashen. "Please, don't be angry, Senior," one emperor stammered. "We truly didn't know the Shenmeng dynasty was connected to you. We beg you, allow us to withdraw." Saint Xiang's lips curved into a frosty smile. He stood tall, every inch the dignified leader, as he regarded the trembling monarchs. "So now you finally choose to retreat?" he asked quietly. He paused, then continued with cold precision. "I granted you mercy once, yet you squandered it. I demand that the emperors of your 4 dynasties present themselves at Tianshu Pavilion within 3 days and willingly give up their lives." Saint Xiang's voice remained calm, almost gentle, belying the steel beneath. "If, after 3 days, they have not come before me, then your 4 divine dynasties will be wiped from existence." Outwardly, the members of Tianshu Pavilion had long cultivated a reputation for generosity and compassion, but that benevolence was a luxury born of their meteoric rise. And at the heart of that ascent, guiding Tianshu Pavilion toward overlordship of Qianyu, stood Saint Xiang himself, its formidable deputy head. Ye Cheng's reputation was forged in blood and fire. Entire armies lay broken at his feet, their finest warriors slaughtered. Mountain-high piles of corpses and rivers of crimson testified to his terrible power. It was no exaggeration to say that Tianshu Pavilion and its legendary Saint Qiang ruled supreme, feared by every dynasty in Qianyu. Only he had dared to slay 4 emperors in a single lifetime, an act some whispered was the very pinnacle of his mystical cultivation. Now, standing before a trembling assembly of allied monks, Ye Cheng spoke with absolute calm. "Within 3 days," he declared, "the emperor of the divine dynasty shall be no more." A hush fell over the hall. Even the most senior priests bowed their heads. None dared oppose him. At last, 2 of the highest-ranking saints summoned the courage to speak, their voices quavering. "Venerable of Tianshu Pavilion," one managed, "may we ask which elder you are? We must report your arrival to our sovereigns, they may prepare their minds and their hearts." Ye Cheng's eyes glittered beneath his wide-brimmed hat. The silence stretched, heavy as fate itself, until he permitted a wry half-smile to curve his lips. "I am but a humble servant of Tianshu Pavilion," he said softly, "and yet this name should be enough to herald what is to come." With that, he turned on his heel and vanished into the marble corridors, leaving the allied monks to tremble anew at the promise of doom looming over their emperors. "I am Qiang." Saint Qiang's proclamation rolled out like thunder, shattering the allied monks' last glimmer of defiance. "Qiang? The deputy pavilion master of Tianshu Pavilion, Saint Qiang!" The allied emperors stared in mute astonishment. They realized, to their horror, that the man who had just arrived was not only the venerable master of Tianshu Pavilion, but a saint venerable of unmatched power, the overlord of Qianyu himself. They counted themselves fortunate that their previous skirmishes had cost only the lives of lesser emperors and not someone of Saint Qiang's stature. How could the Shenmeng dynasty be connected to such a figure, and to a sect of this caliber? They wondered, though the question would go forever unanswered. One thing was clear: with Saint Qiang's arrival, any hope of annihilating the Shenmeng dynasty evaporated instantly. The allied forces would have to abandon their ambitions, prostrate themselves before the dynasty, and entreat its mercy. And so, thoroughly humiliated, the allied army withdrew from Shenfeng City in disgrace. Emperor Shiyu and the high prelates of the Shenmeng order, Emperor Lei Shen, Emperor Yun Xiao, and the others, stepped forward in unison and knelt before Saint Qiang. Their voices trembled with gratitude. "We owe our very lives and the future of the Shenmeng dynasty to you, Senior Qiang. Had you not intervened today, our dynasty would have been lost forever." Saint Qiang met their bowed heads with a calm smile. He gestured for them to rise. "There's no need for such formality," he said lightly. "I was only carrying out my orders. If you truly wish to express your thanks, look to those who issued them." "Your orders?" The gathered monks echoed in surprise, exchanging puzzled glances. "Whose orders could possibly compel a figure of your stature, Senior Qiang?" Saint Qiang's serene expression never wavered as he rose from his seat. He folded his hands behind his back and regarded them thoughtfully. "That is a story for another time," he replied quietly. "For now, the Shenmeng dynasty endures, and that is all that matters." With that, the tension in the courtyard finally eased, and the leaders of Shenmeng began to stand, each man's posture a little less burdened, each heart a little lighter, knowing that, at least for today, their realm was safe. Chapter 144. At Saint Qiang's words, every monk of the Shenmeng order froze. Who could possibly issue orders that even a saint would obey? Aside from the pavilion master of Tianshu, there was no one. Yet what connection could the Shenmeng dynasty possibly have with the pavilion master that would compel him to lend his aid? The crowd grew restless, faces turned toward one another, brows furrowed in puzzlement. Saint Qiang observed them coolly for a moment before continuing. "Surely you know my pavilion master well, perhaps even personally." A murmur rippled through the assembled emperors. Shiyu, Lei Shen, and Yun Xiao exchanged incredulous glances. Soon, Emperor Lei Shen's eyes widened as a shocking realization struck him. He swallowed hard, then raised his head to stare directly at Saint Qiang. "Senior Qiang, do you mean His Highness Ye Cheng?" Saint Qiang's lips curved into a faint smile. "So you've guessed correctly." Chapter Hanks, the arrival of Tianshu Pavilion. Not bad. Saint Qiang's lips curved into a faint, approving smile. He stood beneath the fluttering banners of Shenfeng City, calm and unhurried as dozens of uneasy Shenmeng monks watched him. At his nod, he spoke again. "Yes, the His Highness Cheng Qing your order reveres is none other than the pavilion master of my Tianshu Pavilion, Ye Cheng." A stunned hush swept through the gathered monks. Those who had witnessed Chongqing's miraculous turnaround at the imperial city, how he drove back the enemy with a single decisive sword strike, gaped in disbelief. They had clung to the hope that His Highness would come to their aid, but none suspected that he was Qianyu's overlord, the supreme master of Tianshu Pavilion, and that even the great Saint Venerables must obey his command. Saint Qiang raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. "I have come to rescue you at Pavilion Master Ye Cheng's decree." "Incredible," a breathless voice whispered. No sooner had the word left their lips than Shenfeng's great gates thundered open. Beyond them advanced the disciplined ranks of Tianshu Pavilion, their banners snapping in the wind. The coalition's siege lines, taken utterly by surprise, wavered under the pavilion troops' relentless assault. Within moments, the invaders broke and fled. Shenmeng's defenders, hardened by days of desperate resistance, fell to their knees in gratitude as Tianshu Pavilion soldiers poured into the city. Just as the Shenmeng monks had dared to hope when they sent out their plea for aid, victory arrived at last under Ye Cheng's banner, and with it, the knowledge that in the days to come, no force could stand against the overlord of Qianyu. When the lords of the Four Directions dynasty discovered that the formidable Tianshu Pavilion stood firmly behind the Shenmeng throne, they had no real choice but to heed Saint Qiang's summons. Some did so willingly, others were compelled under threat. In either case, they all made the journey to the pavilion to prostrate themselves, beg forgiveness, and submit to Shenmeng authority. Each new ruler of the Four Directions immediately wrote to Emperor Xuan upon ascending the throne, swearing fealty and offering tribute, formally binding their states as vassals of the Shenmeng dynasty. But Ye Cheng scarcely noticed these grand political shifts. His days were consumed by two priorities. First, the rigorous cultivation sessions he shared with Emperor Xuan, and second, the joy at home. After a torturous 10-month pregnancy, his wife had finally given birth to their third child, a daughter they named Gu Yiren. Already the infant displayed a keen intelligence and refined temperament that surpassed even eldest sister Yunxi and her brother, an auspicious sign that delighted Ye Cheng beyond measure. From the moment Ye Cheng was born, he bore a crimson destiny, the Yuanyang burning heaven body. At his birth, heaven and earth itself trembled, unleashing a phenomenon as astonishing as an ordinary cultivator's ascension to the emperor realm. Crimson divine clouds rolled through the Gu estate, brightening Ji the night as though it were day. Witnessing Ye Cheng's miraculous innate talent, even the Gu family's most promising heirs, siblings Gu Yunxi and Gu Qingchen, could not help but feel overshadowed. In the days that followed, everyone threw themselves into their cultivation with renewed vigor. 15 days before the ancient ruins on the Taiku battlefield were set to open, they tempered their training and boarded the spirit boat alongside Gu Ye Cheng en route to the battlefield. Jiang Lianshan, having just given birth, remained at the estate to regain her strength through gentle practice. Accompanying Ye Cheng were the Gu family elders, each a king realm cultivator, and, among the younger generation, only Gu Ling, Gu Wangshuan, and 3 others who had met the rigorous entry requirements. Venturing into the ancient battlefield was akin to courting death. Unlike the Xuanwang secret realm, challenging though it was, the ancient battlefield tested even the most gifted cultivators. Those lacking in talent or strength would find no hidden treasures to claim, and might never return. To many, it seemed far wiser to remain at their home sect and cultivate in safety. Yet with the battlefield's opening day rapidly approaching, every major Taoist order in southern Shenzhou and across the 3,000 realms sent advance teams to the nearby frontier cities. The Gu clan was no exception. Under the watchful eyes of its elders, young prodigies like Gu Ye Cheng helped oversee provisions, maps, and lodgings, ensuring their party would be fully prepared. The Yuheng Imperial Palace dispatched its own envoys in tandem. Meanwhile, atop Nalan Peak, the Nalan family gathered in solemn procession. Led by their grand elder and flanked by both senior and junior disciples, they marched in perfect formation behind Nalan Qingyuan, each member poised for the trials that awaited them on the ancient battlefield. Excitement gleamed in every eye aboard the spirit boat. Each passenger had long looked forward to this voyage toward the ancient battlefield. Near the prow, Nalan Qingyuan stood quietly, her soft eyes fixed on the rolling sea of clouds below. A flutter of anticipation warmed her chest at the thought of reuniting with her father and brother once their mission was complete. She turned slightly, murmuring to herself, "Speaking of which, Sister Jilling promised she'd meet me there, but she hasn't sent any instructions. How will she find me once we enter the battlefield?" The Sister Jilling in question was Sheng Jilling, scion of the esteemed Sheng family, one of the 8 great branches under the Yuheng Imperial Palace alongside the Nalans. Where the Nalan clan commanded Nalan Peak, the Shengs held sway over Xingluo Peak. And in both talent and power, Sheng Jilin matched Nalan Qingyuan blow for blow, a saintess of her generation and the pride of her house. Long before the ancient battlefield's gates officially opened, Sheng Jilin had promised Nalan Qingyuan they would enter and exit it together. Yet as the battleground's portal finally shimmered into being, there was still no token or summons from Jilin. Nalan Qingyuan, well acquainted with his friend's absent-minded streak, merely smirked. She'd probably forgotten again, no great loss. After all, with Jiling's prodigious strength, it was only a matter of time before her deeds in the battlefield became the talk of the realm, and guided her back to him on their agreed terms. What really preoccupied Qingyuan, however, was news of his own clan. He remembered his mother's worried voice. The Gu family's fortunes had declined sharply. Rumor had it they lacked even a single king-rank cultivator. Without that level of power, their chances of making any real impact in the ancient battlefield were slim. He sighed. Strange, when the battlefield placed no minimum cultivation restriction on entrance. Gu Ye Cheng stood at the bow of the family's spirit boat, his dark eyes fixed on the rippling void ahead. In theory, any cultivator below the Emperor realm, even those who had only just taken their first steps along the Dao, could venture into the ancient battlefield and emerge unscathed. The real obstacle, however, was the void itself. To breach that expanse, a sect needed at least a 4th-level spirit vessel, one attuned to the strength of a king-grade cultivator. Yet the Zhonglin Gu clan lacked even a single king-level master. How could they possibly lay claim to a 4th-level craft? Nalan Qingyuan, standing a few paces behind Gu Ye Cheng, let out a low, rueful sigh. His regret was plain. Without proper protection, the entire clan's expedition might be in jeopardy. If Gu Ye Cheng knew what was running through Nalan Qingyuan's mind, his expression would no doubt have betrayed equal parts amusement and exasperation. Behind them, a dozen junior disciples clustered together on the deck, eyes bright with anticipation. They had sailed for days in silence, following the steady passage of Ye Cheng's boat like loyal shadows. Now, peering into the distance, they could finally make out the faint outline of a grand city, its spires and battlements suspended in the void, not far from the fabled entrance to the ancient battlefield ruins. Ye Cheng's heart quickened. This was the moment they had trained for, the threshold of legend. With a steadying breath, he turned to his companions. "Prepare yourselves," he said quietly, voice firm. "What lies ahead will test every ounce of our resolve, but by the ancestors' will, we will see this through, together." A hush fell over the boat as the city's silhouette grew sharper, its gates aglow with ethereal light. Ahead, the mists parted, and the pathway into the void beckoned. The ancient battlefield awaited. Chapter 145. The ancient battlefield hovered in the void, vast, boundless, and awe-inspiring. Encircling it were several unique cities, each anchored by its faction's forbidden formation so that none tumbled into the abyss, instead shimmering like distant stars. The Black City, where Ye Cheng and his companions had just arrived, was one of these. As the closest settlement to the battlefield's entrance, it drew cultivators from every corner of the land. Yet Ye Cheng felt no unease. Though his Emperor Realm's strength might not top the charts here, it still towered above the average. He merely needed to radiate the aura of his realm for any lurking threats to think twice before acting. After securing lodgings at a reputable inn, Ye Cheng dispatched a summons to all his vassal forces, instructing them to assemble in the Black City. While they made their way, the three young prodigies of the Gu family refused to remain idle. They set out together to explore the city's hidden alleys and grand bazaars, eager to expand their knowledge and sharpen their senses before the real challenge began. Ye Cheng's rise to the imperial realm won immediate support from the Gu family's elders. Gu Ling, Gu Wangshuan, and Gu Yuan had once been merely average, until Ye Cheng's breakthrough spurred them, especially Wangshuan, to awaken their own spiritual body qualifications. Their talents now far outstripped what they once were, and before long, each would be ready to shoulder the responsibilities of the Jianglin Gu clan alongside Ye Cheng himself. Of course, Ye Cheng refused to let them train in isolation. He insisted they venture into the wider world, to confront true danger, test their resolve, and temper their spirits through lived experience rather than sequestered study. He never imagined just how quickly experience would find them. In less than half a month, Brother Yuan's gone, and Gu Ling crept into Ye Cheng's study, hissing the words through a grin, paired off with a noble lady from the God King clan. Ye Cheng looked up from the scroll before him, one brow cocked. "Is that so?" Gu Wangshuan drifted in behind his sister, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Shall we intervene, brother? Put an end to his extracurricular activities?" A soft chuckle escaped Ye Cheng. "And deny him the motivation that's driving his progress? I think not." Gu Ling exchanged a baffled glance with Wangshuan, then leaned forward conspiratorially. "You're actually okay with this?" "Absolutely," Ye Cheng replied, folding the scroll with a smile. "Let him learn, for better or worse, what the world has to offer." The Gu family hasn't been what it once was for some time. Even a prestigious noblewoman from the God King's court, or a high-born lady of the imperial realm, would, in their eyes, be little more than an ordinary match. Though good lineage still matters, none of the younger generation have distinguished themselves enough to command special privileges. As a result, decisions about marriage fall to the family elders, and most importantly, to their cousin, Ye Cheng. Word reached them that Gu Yuan was at last making his intentions clear. Ever eager to see the family's status restored, Gu Ling and Gu Wangshuan lost no time reporting the news, despite any objections from the young couple. They believed that Yuan's genuine feelings would be enough to sway Ye Cheng's approval. "Hold on," Ye Cheng said, lifting a brow as he listened. A faint smile curved his lips. "Brother Yuan is moved at last. How interesting." He waved a hand, dismissing any further hesitation. Ye Cheng had never forgotten how, before his own rise in the clan, Gu Yuan's talent had been the talk of every household. Nor had he forgotten the kindness Yuan had shown him in those early years. "Very well," he continued. Tell Brother Yuan that he may choose his own bride, as long as he's willing to stand by his decision. Ye Cheng's voice was calm and resolute. Our family won't meddle in your marriage choices. If any of you ever need help, just let me know, and we'll take care of it. All I ask is that you keep your eyes open and find the person who truly makes you happy. He smiled gently at the two young women standing before him. Linger, Wang Xuan, the same applies to you. You're free to decide for yourselves, and you'll have my full support, no questions asked. In many prominent families, the marriages of their brightest members are treated like bargaining chips, traded off to strengthen alliances or gain influence. But Ye Cheng refused to follow that path. Under his watch, the Gu family would never have to use their children's futures as leverage. Their happiness would be the only consideration. Brother? Gu Ling's voice shook with surprise, and beside her, their cousin Wang Xuan's eyes brimmed with gratitude. Together they bowed deeply. Thank you, brother, they said in unison. Neither of them had yet met someone they loved, unlike their other cousin, Gu Yuan, who had already found her match. But in that moment, a weight lifted from their shoulders. They realized with profound relief that their hearts were finally their own. Ye Cheng's generous offer that morning had deeply moved them. Standing before him, Gu Ling and Gu Wangshuan bowed their heads in gratitude. Brother Ye Cheng, please rest assured, Gu Ling said earnestly. We'll train day and night and serve the family with our lives. Ye Cheng inclined his head once. I believe you. One more thing. Keep an eye on Gu Yuan. His intentions are pure, but he's still too trusting. Don't let anyone outside take advantage of him. We understand, Wang Xuan added. You have our word. We'll look after him. Satisfied, Ye Cheng nodded and dismissed them. He turned on his heel and strode back to the inn, his mind already on the preparations he needed to make before the next battle. News of Ye Cheng's support filled Gu Yuan with excitement. He had been anxious these past few days, worried that his secret attachment to Quan Kair, the second daughter of the Quan family, might conflict with the clan's strict marriage arrangements. Now, with his cousin's blessing, he finally felt brave enough to seek her out and declare his feelings. But when Gu Yuan hurried to find Quan Kair, he learned she'd just received an urgent summons home. They had only traveled together for a brief stretch, and now, before he could speak his heart, she was being called away. Concern and disappointment warred inside him as he watched her leave, his chance slipping through his fingers once more. But what's going on? Ye Cheng asked, his brow knitting with concern as he took in Quan Kair's worried expression. A flicker of panic danced in her eyes, and her cheeks flushed pink. She swallowed and gave a small nod. Ye Cheng Gege, I have to leave early. I just received word from home. It's vague, but it sounded urgent. Disappointment shadowed her tone. She'd planned tonight to finally confess her feelings to him, but now there was no time, and her family's summons left her uneasy. Ye Cheng's gaze sharpened. Then I'll go with you. It's late, he added quietly. Black City is overrun. Even the city lord's mansion can't enforce order. Rogue cultivators are lurking everywhere, taking advantage of the chaos. I've got the protective sword talisman from Qingdi sect, but you won't be safe on your own. Quan Kair's heart fluttered at his words. She hesitated, torn between gratitude and the urgency pressing on her mind. Finally, she managed a trembling, "Thank you, Ye Cheng Gege." Together, they stepped into the moonlit streets, each secretly bracing for whatever dangers and confessions their journey home might bring. Quan Kair barely hesitated when Ye Cheng offered to see her home. She gave him a grateful nod and fell into step beside him. Before long, they arrived at the inn where her family was staying. Unlike the Gu clan, who had reserved the entire building, the Quans had secured only one floor. Inside the common room, all the cultivators who'd taken part in the ancient battlefield training stood assembled, their faces drawn and serious. Patriarch Quan, who'd led this expedition, looked up when he saw Quan Kair return, and then froze at the sight of the young man at her side. "This is Brother Ye Cheng," Quan Chair hurriedly explained. "He saw me home." Patriarch Quan inclined his head in thanks to Ye Cheng, then refocused on the gathered group. "I've already given you a preliminary report, but let me summarize the situation once more." As more relatives filed in, he addressed them all at once, recapping the day's events in clear, concise detail. The calamity that struck the Quan family came completely out of the blue. Just the day before, the young master had been out gathering intelligence when he accidentally brushed against a stranger. Instead of accepting an apology, the man insisted the young master had stolen his storage pouch. Outraged, the young master protested, but the stranger paid him no mind. He and several companions forcibly searched him in the middle of the street. A crowd quickly gathered, and there was no way to fight them off. Reluctantly, he submitted to their search. To everyone's astonishment, they produced the very pouch in question, his own storage bag. What happened next was inevitable. The young master was immediately detained, and a formal demand was sent to the Quan estate. Either pay 1 million spirit crystals in compensation or deliver 4th-tier, top-grade spirit tools to the 3 sects, all to be settled before the ancient battlefield opens. Fail to meet these terms, and there will be no hope of the young master's return. These wicked cultivators are unbearably overbearing. Gu Yuan stood beside the Quan family spokesman, listening to their grim tale. He shook his head and released a quiet sigh. He'd heard rumors of this disaster over the past few days, but nothing prepared him for seeing its effects in person. Watching the Quan clan's anguish, he thanked his lucky stars that his brother, Ye Cheng, was there to protect him. The family was in a state of panic. Their young master, heir to the Quan name, had been seized. As a prodigy destined for the Emperor realm, they had poured every resource they possessed into his cultivation. Losing him now would be unthinkable. And the ransom they were asked to pay, it was astronomical. 1 million spirit crystals, the family elder choked out, or 3 4th-order spirit weapons, each one the pinnacle armament of a major sect. Gu Yuan's jaw dropped. Even a world god king, the leader of an entire sect, rarely owned more than a single 4th-order spirit sword. Where on earth would the Quans find 2 more? Yet they had no choice. Either that, or surrender their future. That wretch, I warned him a dozen times, no brawling outside the clan. Clan leader Mu's face was ashen with fury and worry. He ground his teeth, scarcely able to contain his grief. Elder, you can't blame young master Ye Cheng for this. It was a deliberate trap. Even the kindest cultivators can fall prey to such schemes. At his side, the senior elder shook his head gravely. You're right, we've heard whispers of this method before. Young masters and even revered saints snatched away by underhanded conspiracies. There is no doubt, a league of sinister cultivators has orchestrated this. Their despair was cut short when Elder Wangjing burst into the hall, breathless and wide-eyed. He sank to one knee before the clan leader. Clan leader? Senior elder, I've just confirmed the identity of our adversary. The force that abducted young Master Gu is known as the Ye Gang, a notorious band of rogue cultivators based in Black City. A cold hush fell over the assembly as the weight of those words settled. Black City's criminals were ruthless, their name enough to send a chill through any heart. Now, with their most promising young master in enemy hands, the clan's next move would determine Ye Cheng's fate, and perhaps the fate of them all. Steam curled from heated teacups as the heads of the Wangjing clan gathered in their ancestral hall. At the center of the long lacquered table lay a sealed missive bearing the stamp of the Ye Gang. An eld broke the tense silence. They're not even a true sect, just a band of vicious cultivators. Another elder pulled a deep breath. But we've heard worse. The Ye Gang boasts several great emperors, and there are whispers that they answer to one of Black City's 3 great sects, Gaiunmen. Methinks this can't be true. The clan patriarch slammed his fist on the table. The Ye Gang is ruthless enough. If Gaiunmen is backing them, we're doomed. Heads dipped in agreement. The Ye Gang's audacity was already staggering, staging an outright robbery and then demanding compensation from the victimized clans. Bitter laughter echoed through the hall. Compensation? One of the family heads scoffed. What could we possibly offer them now? Beside him, a junior elder leaned in and whispered, My lord, our third Miss Gu hasn't returned from the capital yet. She married into the imperial household. Perhaps her husband might intercede for us. A flicker of hope crossed the patriarch's face. Though third Miss Gu lacked extraordinary talent, her union with the emperor's legitimate son granted her considerable influence. If anyone could sway the balance against the Ye Gang and their rumored patronage by Guyunmen, it would be her. As soon as the Quan clan learned of the Ye Gang's ultimatum, panic swept through the estate. Elder Quan turned to his third daughter, Yue, and charged her with one simple task. Go to our allies and beg their help. We don't expect them to hand over millions of spirit crystals or treasure troves of spirit tools, only to intercede with the Ye Gang, to plead for clemency and a lighter penalty. Yue bowed and left at once, but when she returned the following dawn, her eyes were heavy with bad news. "Father, I'm sorry," she murmured. "My husband spoke with them, and they refused. The Ye Gang won't budge. Their influence is absolute. Even the Heavenly Emperor's word falls flat before them. Rumor says that were the God Emperor himself to plead, it still wouldn't change their mind." A profound silence fell over the hall. Elder Quan closed his eyes, pressing a hand to his forehead. He let out a slow, bitter sigh. "Yue, you've done everything you could. This is Ye Cheng's fate." Despair hung in the air like a gathering storm. Then from the far corner of the room, a calm voice drifted forth. Soft, measured, and entirely unexpected. "Perhaps I can help." Chapter 146. Gu Yuan cleared his throat and spoke up. Although he already had Ye Cheng's approval, he still approached the matter cautiously. After all, rumors said their rivals enjoyed the backing of a supreme giant in the venerable realm. He needed to be absolutely sure before committing. At his words, every member of the Quan family turned to look. Patriarch Quan's gaze flicked to his youngest daughter, Kair. The expression on his face was unreadable. After all, even the imperial clan hadn't bothered to take her side. What kind of ally could this young Gu possibly be? Yet Gu Yuan's tone had been so sincere that the old man found himself unable to dismiss the request outright. Quiet murmurs rippled through the assembled elders. None dared voice an objection. Under their piercing stares, Kair's cheeks flushed a rosy pink. She pressed her hands together and managed a shy smile. "This is Brother Gu Yuan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's a good friend I've made recently." Her shyness spoke volumes, and the other family elders exchanged knowing looks. Despite understanding exactly what good friend implied, they all shook their heads in unison, refusing to relent. They may not have expected Gu Yuan to accomplish anything, but they still forced polite smiles. "Young friend, you say you can help. How so?" Gu Yuan felt their thinly veiled distrust, but paid it no mind. He inclined his head respectfully. "To be honest, I can't promise anything until I've asked my family elders for their consent." One of the relatives pressed on. "If your family agrees." A faint smile curved Gu Yuan's lips. He thought of the heavenly book pavilion overseen by his cousin Ye Cheng, and his confidence shone in his tone. "Even if the Ye Gang joins forces with the entire Gaian sect, I'm not intimidated." With that, Gu Yuan closed his eyes for a moment. He wove a sliver of his divine consciousness into the protective sword talisman that Ye Cheng had entrusted to him. The talisman quivered in his hand before its power surged outward. Back at the modest inn where the Gu family was quartered, Ye Cheng sensed the talisman's awakening. He retrieved it, absorbed Gu Yuan's silent message, and, after reviewing every detail, nodded once. There was no hesitation in his voice when he spoke aloud. "Very well. You have my support." Although he understood the endless clashes and territorial skirmishes between the sects, Ye Cheng could not stomach the brutal tactics of the Ye Gang and Gu Yunmen. To keep Gu Yuan safe, he quietly arranged for him to remain at the family estate. Then, drawing in his divine senses, he sent a summons to the Tianshu Pavilion contingent, who had just arrived in Ye Cheng and taken lodgings at a separate inn. The Tianshu Pavilion force and the Gu family reached the city almost simultaneously, but Ye Cheng deliberately held back his call to assemble. He commanded several king-level sects under his banner, and if any struck out on their own, the risk of disaster on the ancient battlefield would be far too great. Better to have everyone gather first, meet one another, and learn each other's strengths and weaknesses before entering that deadly arena together. Inside the pavilion's inn, Pavilion Master Saint Qiang and his deputy, Saint Yunxiao, received Ye Cheng's message without hesitation. "The master's orders have arrived," Yunxiao announced. Qiang nodded once, decisive. He turned to one of his heavenly venerables, Shen Yi. "Take a handful of our most trusted elders and begin making the necessary arrangements. We leave nothing to chance." Within moments, Xianxia rose to carry out his orders, gathering his closest lieutenants to ensure Tianshu Pavilion would be fully prepared when the summons finally came. On the Quan family's side, when Gu Yuan received word back from Ye Cheng, he visibly relaxed. He looked around at the anxious faces of the Quan relatives, giving them a reassuring nod and smile. The Gu family elders have agreed. They've already dispatched people to help resolve this matter. "Are you serious, my friend?" someone asked, eyes wide. "Brother Yuan, is this for real?" Quan Kair chimed in, his voice trembling with hope. The family patriarch and the others exchanged stunned glances. Then, one by one, they bowed deeply to Gu Yuan. "Our entire family thanks you, young friend, and the Gu family, for your kindness." Still kneeling, they added in unison, "Rest assured, young friend Gu Yuan, we know our place. All we ask is that the Gu elders step in as mediators, extend the compensation, and, if possible, save my worthless son." Gu Yuan frowned slightly. Extend the compensation? With his cousin's position and character, once they'd resolved to take on the Ye gang and the Gu Yun sect, there was no turning back, and no simple payout would satisfy him. Ye Cheng offered no further explanation. He simply nodded in acknowledgement. Quan Kair stared at him, her heart swelling with a quiet joy. Around them, the Gu family's elders exchanged astonished looks. They had always known their clan was formidable, but learning that Ye gang and the Guyun sect, the two great powers in the realm, stood behind this union, filled them with new pride. To have such allies supporting their third daughter was an extraordinary blessing. Just then, a soft whisper of robes drifted through the inn's corridor. "Master Gu Yuan, are you here?" came a calm, aged voice. Gu Yuan, head of the Gu family, rose to his feet and hurried out of the room. In the dimly lit hall stood an elderly man clad in a flowing black robe, his features hidden in shadow. Flanking him were 3 disciples, 2 women and a man, each carrying an air of quiet authority. As soon as he spotted Gu Yuan, the robed elder inclined his head respectfully. "I am Xianxia, sent by the pavilion master to assist you, Master Gu Yuan." Gu Yuan blinked in surprise. "Senior, under Brother Ye Cheng's leadership, there's no need." He stopped himself, eyes widening as he realized the weight behind Xianxia's words. A discreet smile crept onto his face. "Please, come in. We are honored by the pavilion master's support." Xianxia nodded once, and together with his 3 attendants, he entered the hall. Outside the inn's wooden doors, a gentle breeze stirred the lanterns, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Inside, the Gu family's fortunes just took an even grander turn. Standing before him were no ordinary warriors, but the giants of Tianshu Pavilion, the elite force under his cousin's command. The sight alone steadied Ye Cheng's nerves. Though Xianxia and his companions didn't bother to release their power, their mere presence seemed to solidify the very air in the inn. Such overwhelming might left no doubt. These were foes or allies, far beyond the capabilities of common fighters. At once, every member of the Gu family bowed deeply, following their clan leader's example. "We welcome you, honored seniors, and thank you for your aid," they intoned in unison. Xianxia inclined his head in acknowledgement, saying little. After a brief pause, he turned his gaze to Gu Yuan. "Master Gu, do you know where Ye gang is located?" Gu Yuan hesitated, casting a quick look at the clan head beside him. That elder stepped forward without a moment's doubt. "I know the way. I will be honored to lead you. Please let me know if there is anything else you require before we set out," he added politely. Ye Cheng opened his mouth to speak before Xianxia cut him off. "No need," Xianxia said quietly. "Just take us to Ye gang." Without another word, he motioned for everyone to follow him. Within minutes, they arrived at the courtyard the Ye gang had chosen for today's hostage exchanges, and everyone fell silent. They weren't the only ones here. More than a dozen clans and sects had gathered, each having just reclaimed their kidnapped children. Some parents still looked drawn and pale, their clothes stained with old blood. As they guided their freed kids toward safety, relief mingled with helplessness in their eyes. At the far end of the courtyard stood Ye Nanshan, the Ye gang's leader. In front of him lay hundreds of storage bags so swollen with spirit crystals that they strained at the seams. Even the anti-expansion wards embroidered on the leather couldn't contain the sheer volume of gems. The bags bulged grotesquely, spilling crystals onto the flagstones like a glittering tide. Ye and Ye Cheng exchanged a glance. The sight was overwhelming but unmistakable. The Ye gang had come prepared. Now it was Ye Cheng's turn to prove his family's worth. He squared his shoulders, stepping forward into the courtyard to meet Ye Nanshan, ready to negotiate the ransom and secure his sister's release once and for all. Divine light pulsed outward from the dissipating spiritual energy, bathing the entire courtyard in a brilliant glow. Thanks to the opening of this ancient battlefield, all these rich prey, our fat sheep, have been driven right to our doorstep. Ye Nanshan practically quivered with excitement. Such a bounty of cultivation resources would see him comfortably supplied for decades. No, centuries. And he still hadn't even unleashed 20 or 30 more of his prime beasts. He was already counting his future gains when a sharp summons cut through his thoughts. At a silent signal from Ye, one of his Xuanzun-level disciples strode forward, his expression cold as steel. "Send out the person in charge of the Yi clan's affairs," he commanded, voice echoing across the courtyard. "And bring your young master here safely, within 10 breaths. Any attempt to obstruct us, and I will level this entire place." The threat struck like a thunderbolt. Cultivators who had come to pay tribute, as well as Yi clan retainers, all went pale. Ye Nanshan's grin vanished, replaced by a hard, icy glare. But the moment Ye Nanshan heard the end of this Xuanzun's title, the cold flicker in his eyes vanished. A supreme giant of the Xuanzun realm? That was the same realm his own father, master of Gyun sect, had long since attained. What on earth was happening? He wanted to haul his disciples off and teach them a lesson for getting involved with forces they barely understood. He'd expressly ordered them to target only weak opponents. How had they stumbled into the path of such a venerable figure? Across the courtyard, everyone froze. Venerable? The very bodyguard the Gaiyuan family had summoned proved to be a supreme giant of the Xuanzun realm? The realization left them dazed. Ye Nanshan forced himself to steady his racing heart. After all, his father was also a Xuanzun and had reached its later stages. Swallowing his pride, he strode from the courtyard with a dozen loyal disciples. Bowing deeply before the newcomer, he spoke with controlled respect. "Esteemed senior, may I inquire which sect you represent? Forgive my candor. My name is Ye Nanshan, and I am the son of the master of Gyun sect." Even as a supreme leader, Ye Nanshan challenged, voice steady despite the tremor in his heart. "If you want me to release him, the least you could do is tell me your name." A cold laugh drifted from beneath the pavilion's embroidered crimson robes. "My name?" The Xuanzun of Tianshu Pavilion tilted his head, his eyes glinting like sharpened steel. "Do you think you're worthy of it?" Ye Nanshan's pulse thundered in his ears. He drew himself up. "With all due respect, Senior Xuanzun, I may not be on your level, but I'm no pushover. If you refuse this small courtesy, then I will compel you to speak, and I won't hesitate to fight you for it." A ripple of astonished whispers ran through the assembled cultivators. After all, the Gyun sect boasted multiple Xuanzun of its own. How dare this unknown elder threaten one of their number? A faint smile curved the pavilion master's lips. Then, in the blink of an eye, he lifted a single hand. A hurricane of spiritual force exploded outward, and with a deafening crack, his palm slammed into Ye Nanshan's chest. Time seemed to shatter. Before anyone could draw a breath, Ye Nanshan's defiant glare went blank. Blood spurted in a pulsing arc, and his body dropped to the stone fall, or like a puppet with its strings cut. Silence reigned in the pavilion. Every cultivator stood frozen, staring at the lifeless form of the man who had dared to demand the Xuanzun's name and paid for it with his life. Chapter 147. Dead. Just like that. A collective gasp rose as Ye Nanshan's body crumpled under the crushing palm strike. Ye Gang's remaining cultivators, their families, and even curious onlookers who'd paid tribute recoiled in shock. All eyes locked on the Xuanzun of Tianshu Pavilion, and Ye at his side with a mix of awe and terror. That was Ye Nanshan, the leader of Gyun sect's own son, and he died so easily. Incredible, utterly incredible. Who is this Xuanzun to be so arrogant? I don't know his name, but I know this. Ye Nanshan wasn't the eldest, but he's his father's favorite, born to the sect leader's favored concubine. If word of his death spreads, the Gyun sect will never forgive it. Do you think this will trigger a venerable realm showdown? Whispers rippled through the crowd. Everyone instinctively stepped back, fearful of being caught in the fallout. After all, if two powers at the peak of the venerable realm clashed, all of Black City would be swept away in the aftermath. All the onlooking cultivators felt a shiver run down their spines. After all, the entire Gu family was trapped in that swirling vortex. Their shock only intensified. Quan Kai's hand shook so badly she could barely hold on to Ye Cheng's. She swallowed hard, disbelieving what she'd just witnessed. Ye Nanshan, the revered venerable's own son, had been shattered in an instant. "Brother Cheng, are all the elders of the Gu family really this ruthless?" she whispered. Ye Cheng forced a wry smile. In truth, even he hadn't expected the Tianshu Pavilion's Xuanzun elder to act so decisively. Still, Ye Nanshan had provoked someone of that caliber without the slightest restraint. His downfall, to some degree, was of his own making. Before anyone could catch their breath, a thunderous cry echoed from the vortex. The leader of the Gaian sect in Ye Cheng, the very late-stage Xuanzun whom everyone believed dead, threw open his eyes, blazing with outrage. "Nanshan is dead! You dare! How dare you!" His roar shook the heavens. "Who dares to harm my son?" With those words, he unleashed a towering surge of spiritual energy and shot skyward in a single, furious bound. In the blink of an eye, Ye Cheng materialized at the center of the courtyard, Ye Gang's banner rippling behind him. His presence shimmered in prismatic hues, deep, unfathomable, an abyss concealed beneath brilliant light. Within moments, he fixed a chilling gaze on the Tianshu Pavilion's Xuanzun who had launched the assault. Lord Gun of the Gaian sect stepped forward, voice low and deadly. "Fellow Taoist," he demanded, "what has my son done to deserve such treatment?" A Ye Gang envoy rushed up beside him and spoke bluntly. "You wiped out an entire family for nothing more than a god-king lineage, and now you dare offend Ye Gang and the Gaian sect both?" Guian's laughter rang out, harsh with anger. He had assumed his own son was at fault, but hearing this account only fueled his fury. The pavilion's Xuanzun, after all, was only mid-stage, hardly a match for a late-stage master like himself. Even if he had been equal in strength, such arrogance could not go unpunished. Murderous intent flared around Lord Guyan like a storm. There was no longer any choice but to fight. The assembled cultivators couldn't help but hold their breath. A chill ran through every family member present, sending tingles across their scalps and tightening their chests with dread. Just as panic threatened to overtake them, Shen Yi, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward to stand beside the Tianshu Pavilion's venerable Xuanzun. With a single, silken footfall came a thunderous boom. An oppressive force, far surpassing even a mysterious venerable's might, burst outward from Shen Yi, sweeping across the courtyard and surging dozens of miles in every direction. The weight of it pressed down like an ocean of mountains, so overwhelming that no one dared lift their heads. Even the usually imperious master of the Lonely Cloud sect, who a heartbeat before had exuded unshakable arrogance, felt his chest tighten and his heart quake with sheer terror. Ye Cheng surveyed the terrified leader of the Lonely Cloud sect with cool detachment. "Your entire family are merely god kings, hardly a threat," he said. "But when you provoke my pavilion master's relatives, powerful figures in the heavenly venerate, you cross a line no one in your sect, not even your son, can afford to challenge." He paused, his voice dropping to an icy command. "Now, kneel and apologize to my entire family." The words carried the unmistakable weight of a Tianzun. The Lonely Cloud sect's chief felt as though the heavens themselves pressed down on him. He swallowed hard, horror tightening his chest. He cursed his foolish son under his breath. What madness had led the boy to offend someone of such high standing? This wasn't merely a personal slight, it jeopardized the entire sect. For a moment, the patriarch froze. Then, with a loud thud, he dropped to his knees, forehead smashing against the stone floor. He dared not raise his eyes, knowing full well that any defiance now would mean ruin for him and everyone in his care. He crashed to his knees with a heavy thud, forehead striking the ground as he kowtowed desperately. "Honored sect leaders, fellow Taoists, I know nothing of the calamity you've suffered. Every bit of it was the work of that wicked boy." The patriarch of the Gaian sect fell to his own knees beside him, voice trembling as he begged, "Please, merciful Taoists, have pity on me. I swear I had no part in this atrocity. I'll make full restitution." Whatever you ask. At the sight of the Guyan leader groveling so abjectly, the Ye family's disciples and the surrounding cultivators dared not hesitate. They formed an escort and hurriedly summoned the young master of the Gu clan to step forward. Members of the Gu family and representatives from every nearby faction looked on in stunned silence. Never before had they imagined that Lord Xuanzun, the indomitable overlord of Black City, would abase himself so completely. Their entire world seemed to spin at the sight. Only when they finally caught their breath did their eyes settle on the young master himself, Ye Cheng, standing coolly at the forefront of his clan. The female disciples of the various clans couldn't help but cast envious glances at Quan Kair. Even many cultivators of her own generation within the family looked on with jealousy. But Quan Kair paid them no mind. She was simply too thrilled and a little stunned to believe how formidable her beloved Ye Cheng truly was. His power was so overwhelming that he'd compelled a venerable elder to bow in contrition before the clan elders. As for the family patriarch himself, well, that was a blessing beyond imagining. "My daughter has exquisite taste," the old man proclaimed, his voice trembling with pride. "She's found a true hero, a match that brings honor to our family for generations to come." Of course, this wasn't the moment to press for wedding plans. Otherwise, the entire clan would be insisting on an immediate engagement. For now, all eyes were on the crouching figure before them, the leader of the Guyun sect. Still on his knees, unperturbed by the stares of his peers and subordinates, he kept his head bowed low before Xianxia. "Senior, I have already offered my apology," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Xianxia regarded him calmly, her expression unreadable. Ye Cheng's sword whispered through the air. Under the stunned gaze of the Guyun sect master, Ye Cheng flicked his wrist, and with a single, fluid stroke the man's head rolled to the ground. Moments ago, Ye Cheng had offered a formal apology. Now there was nothing left to say. "You three, finish them. Eradicate the Guyun sect," he commanded, his voice as calm as ever. The three Xuanzun elders bowed once in unison. "Yes, Lord Gu." In an instant, they melted into motion. One elder swept toward the cluster of Yegang cultivators standing guard, blades flashing in the courtyard sun as bodies fell. The other two charged deeper into the sect's compo, carving a path straight to the inner halls. Throughout it all, Ye Cheng watched impassively, as if overseeing a mundane task rather than orchestrating an extermination. To him, this was merely settling an old debt. His earlier apology had been nothing more than a formality, an attempt to placate the Guyun sect's pride. It had never been enough to atone for the true offense, the sect master's insult to Tianshu Pavilion, Ye Cheng's own family. Mercy had never been promised for that transgression, and none would be granted. Tonight, Guyun sect would learn how small a price they paid for daring to cross him. Xianxia's blood boiled at the news that the head of the Guyun sect had pampered his son and stirred up trouble in Black City. Though the Guyun leader was himself a mighty Xuanzun powerhouse, before the might of the Tianshu Pavilion, he was little more than an irritant, and Xianxia could not tolerate it any longer. His own pavilion master commanded numerous vassals and clansmen. Until now, he'd had no real opportunity to put down a challenge so brazen. But with the Guyun sect's provocations, Xianxia resolved to make an example of them. His plan was simple. First, cut the grass and pull out the roots. Eliminate a key figure in their ranks so sharply that no one else would dare follow suit. Second, raise his pavilion master's prestige throughout Black City so that every would-be troublemaker would think twice before crossing his vassals. The three Xuanzun elders of the Tianshu Pavilion received Xianxia's orders with identical impassive bows. They had risen alongside the Saint of Qiyang, carving their path through 1,000 bloody battles and shattering countless foes. Nothing less than total victory and ruthless deterrence would do, and they were more than ready. Only the nearby Taoist warriors and even the Gu family members who had been watching stood frozen in horror. The head of the Guyun sect lay dead before them, his eyes fixed wide open. Then their gazes swept to the Ye clan's dark cultivators, who scattered in every direction only to be relentlessly cut down. A collective chill ran through all who watched. The shock and awe in their eyes as they stared at Xianxia and his companions was almost palpable. Chapter 148, The Gu Family, Remember This. Never cross them. At Xianxi's unflinching glare, every sect leader there paled. None dared show the slightest disrespect to the Gu family. With the Guyan sect already dealt with, Xianxi made a simple bow to Gu Yuan. The matter is concluded. We will take our leave now. Gu Yuan inclined his head in return and watched Xianxi and his entourage stride away. Once they'd gone, he muttered under his breath, "Could it really be my cousin Ye Cheng? His forces move just like my cousins do." He thought back to how Gu Ye Cheng had, without hesitation, raised the Kanglan Holy Land in the spirit realm, swift, merciless, utterly decisive. The news that the Guyan sect, one of the three ruling powers of Black City, had been annihilated spread like wildfire. As Xianxi had predicted, once word got out that it was tied to the Gu family, no one in Black City dared give a Gu family member so much as a curious glance on the street. Silence reigned as each faction absorbed the warning. Cross the Gu family at your own peril. Word of the Gu family's prowess had spread like wildfire through Ye Cheng. Small sects and minor cultivator forces, once bullied by malicious adversaries, now whispered Gu Ye Cheng's name in desperation, and it was enough to send their tormentors fleeing. These tales, though minor in scope, swelled the Gu family's reputation almost overnight. With Ye Cheng abuzz at the prospect of the coming campaign, two of Gu Ye Cheng's king-ranked Lis, Chen Yun, patriarch of Chenxin Pavilion, and Yin Taishang of the Mu clan, arrived in the city, each accompanied by their heirs and chief disciples. They had agreed to gather and await Gu Ye Cheng's summons. In the pavilion's moonlit courtyard, Chen Yun greeted Yin Taishang warmly. "I'm relieved the master sent word," he confessed. "Had I set out for the ancient battlefield alone, I cannot say I'd have had the courage." Yin Taishang nodded. "His message steadies us." Despite their lofty status across the southern spiritual domain and the Wanyao Sea, and despite being formidable kings in their own right, both masters felt the weight of the trials ahead. Whether on the ancient battlefield or beyond, even their combined might barely suffice. Knowing Gu Ye Cheng would stand beside them lifted a heavy burden from their hearts. Since they were traveling under their master, Gu Ye Cheng, everything changed. Both Yin Taishang and Chen Yun had been astonished the day they'd accompanied him to his wedding. They'd actually watched Deputy Pavilion Master Qiang Saint of Tianshu Pavilion step forward and personally offer his blessings. It remained one of the most unforgettable moments of their lives. "Let's wait until the juniors return," Chen Yun said with a grin. "Then we'll go pay our respects to His Majesty ourselves." At that moment, the door slid open. A young man in green stepped lightly into the room. He was tall and slender, his every movement composed and smooth, with just a hint of arrogance in the set of his brow. "This is Mu Ming," Chen Yun announced. "He's the newest genius Master Gu Ye Cheng's sisters, Gu Qinger and Gu Xier, discovered after they left Chenxin Pavilion to cultivate in Kangming Valley. While his talent and background don't rival theirs, Mu Ming is still one of the Wanyao Sea's rare prodigies. Born to a royal-ranked clan, his elemental affinity borders on the great path of wood, and his spirit reserves run far deeper and longer than those of his peers." Mu Ming inclined his head in acknowledgement. "I'm honored to train under Master Gu Ye Cheng alongside all of you." Yin Taishang and Chen Yun exchanged respectful nods. Within that lacquered hall, the bond among disciples under Gu Ye Cheng's guiding hand grew ever stronger. Each of them determined to prove themselves worthy of the master who had given them so much. Under Master Chen Yun's guidance, Mu Ming's cultivation has now risen to the 8th level of the Tribulation Realm. With such talent, she may still fall short of the very pinnacle in the Wanyao Sea, but she's unquestionably one of the top 3 among her peers. Over time, the girl's growing pride has both delighted and worried Chen Yun. Delighted because her confidence speaks to her potential, worried because unchecked arrogance can be a cultivation killer. Yet after only half a day exploring Black City, Mu Ming's haughty expression had already softened. Seeing her return, Chen Yun stroked his long beard, a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes, and teased, "Minger, what's with the change? Did you meet a true genius out there?" That was exactly his intention in bringing her here, to broaden her world beyond the Wanyao Sea's confines. The effect was immediate. Mu Ming's cheeks warmed at his joke, but her eyes still shone with excitement and a fierce yearning. Not long ago, she'd watched a super talent perform on the grand fighting stage erected in the heart of the city, where young prodigies showcase their martial prowess and seize fame. The memory of that breathtaking display left her eager to learn more and to rise higher herself. Mu Ming's eyes sparkled as she recalled his sheer power. Though he was about her age, Ye Cheng had already broken into the Xuan King realm, and his combat prowess was nothing short of terrifying. No matter how strong an opponent might be, he could fell them with a single swing of his sword. Listening to her, Chen Yun and Yin Taishang couldn't help but exchange amused glances. Mu Ming had deliberately left his name unspoken, so they, too, kept their thoughts to themselves. Entering the Xuan King realm at such a young age was certainly impressive, but in their eyes it was only a modest feat. After all, their master, still in his early 20s, had already reached the Emperor realm and even seized control of the saintly Dao's Tianshu Pavilion. Compared to that, what mortal genius could truly surprise them? Chen Yun gave Mu Ming a friendly clap on the shoulder and grinned. Welcome to Black City, the Void Realm city, where clouds swirl endlessly before the gate of the ancient battlefield. Once the battlefield truly opens and we step inside, the forces gathered there will dwarf anything you've seen here, spanning all 3,000 realms of southern Shenzhou. He narrowed his eyes playfully. You'll meet super geniuses far more formidable than that fellow you just sparred with, so rein in that pride of yours and train harder. You'll need every edge you can get. Mu Ming's cheeks flamed at his teasing. Remembering how haughty she'd been, she had no courage left to argue. Chen Yun chuckled at her sudden bashfulness, then rose to his feet. Perfect timing. I've already told your Uncle Yin that I'm taking you to Yunhai Tower. His Highness Ye Cheng is waiting for us there. His Highness Ye Cheng? Mu Ming echoed, her heart skipping a beat. Mu Ming had never heard that name before. His Highness Ye Cheng is the true power behind my Chenshin Pavilion, Chen Yun said calmly. To be honest, our little pavilion is merely one of His Highness's vassals. A cold knot formed in Mu Ming's stomach. So the Chenshin Pavilion she'd sworn loyalty to was actually subordinate to some shadowy force? The thought stung, especially given her own pedigree. As a daughter of the prestigious Mu family, she was supposed to command respect, not serve as someone else's underling. If her friends back home ever found out, they'd never let her live it down. Mu Ming pressed her lips together, recalling her master's strict orders not to argue. Still, she couldn't hide the tightening of her jaw and the flicker of resentment in her eyes. Chen Yun simply shook his head and offered a patient smile. He understood all too well how his disciple felt. He would have bristled too, in her place. But he had no intention of explaining further. In due time, he added softly, when we reach the Yunhai Tower and you witness His Highness Ye Cheng's true influence, you'll understand. For Chenshin Pavilion, being granted the honor of following the prince was nothing short of a marvel. Embarrassment? Hardly. Even a powerhouse like Tianshu Pavilion, on bows before him as its master. If he but spoke a word, I have no doubt dozens of imperial sects would kneel and swear their lives to him on the spot. The only reason our humble Chenshin Pavilion secured this privilege is that His Highness is still young. Once he comes of age, our modest sect, with its lone Xuan King, won't even merit a second glance. Not even if we boasted a God King among us. Chapter 149. Chen Yun exhaled softly as he and Yin Taishang led their heirs toward Yunhai Tower. The Jianglin Gu family clansmen had already received Prince Ye Cheng's instructions and were ready to welcome them. The courtyard glittered under carefully strung lanterns and banners, every detail arranged for the grand assembly. Chen Yun, Yin Taishang, and Mu Zi, who had accompanied Yin Taishang, stood patiently, their expressions calm. Mu Ming, on the other hand, shifted from foot to foot, barely containing her eagerness. She reminded herself to stay composed in front of her master, so she folded her hands and waited politely. Then a thunderous boom echoed across the sea. In the distance, a great spirit boat descended from the clouds, sails billowing with radiant energy. As it touched down gently, Ancestor Kangming stepped forth, his aura resonating with the full perfection of the Xuanhuang realm. Behind him walked Gu Wanli and the other senior leaders of the Kangming Gu family. Imperial realm power. Mu Ming's breath caught. The sheer magnitude of his cultivation pressure rolled over the courtyard, sending a thrill through her veins. In the vast expanse of the Wanyao Sea, god kings were exceedingly rare. An imperial realm master was all but unheard of. Could this Emperor Dao sect be the hidden power supporting His Highness Ye Cheng? If so, joining them would be far easier than she had ever imagined. Her heart pounded at the possibilities unfolding before her. The power behind His Highness Ye Cheng? Mu Ming ventured. Chen Yun chuckled and waved a hand. Don't jump to conclusions, Minger. Senior Kongming isn't Ye Cheng's hidden mastermind, he's... Before Chen Yun could finish, the great ancestor Kongming entered the courtyard, flanked by a dozen or so silver-haired elders. Each of them radiated the calm authority of an imperial realm cultivator. Mu Ming stared, her eyes wide. This imperial realm powerhouse and his entire clan answer to His Highness Ye Cheng? Chen Yun smiled and nodded. That's right. The Kongming Gu family may be a branch of the Jianglin Gu line, but their loyalty to Ye Cheng is absolute. Mu Ming's jaw dropped. She'd come in bristling with impatience and disdain, certain Ye Cheng was beneath her notice. Yet here stood a family of empire-level power, pledging fealty to him. Chen Yun's quiet laughter reflected his satisfaction. Let this be your lesson, Minger. True authority isn't built on rumor or arrogance, it's proven by unwavering devotion. At his words, Mu Ming felt her doubts melt away. If even the imperial legions bowed to Ye Cheng, then he was no mere noble. He was a man deserving of her deepest respect. Chen Yun and Yin Taishang paid no mind to the whispers of the younger crowd. The moment they spotted Patriarch Gu Kongming approaching, they stepped forward together, bows practiced and precise. Years ago, they had been among the first to swear loyalty to Ye Cheng when he came into his position, and though neither man was particularly powerful, that early support had earned them this very invitation. Your humble servants salute you, Patriarch Kangming, they intoned, their hands sweeping down in unison. Gu Kongming's lined face broke into a warm smile. He waved them upward. Please, there's no need for such formality. We all serve His Highness. No need to stand on ceremony. A flush of pride warmed Chen Yun's and Yin Taishang's cheeks. Without their early allegiance to Ye Cheng, they'd be little more than two lowly Xuan kings, unlikely ever to draw the notice of an emperor, however respectfully they bowed. As they straightened, grins tugging at their lips, a procession of young prodigies from the Kangming clan followed in Gu Kongming's wake, led by the composed figure of Gu Wanli. The courtyard brimmed with their eager energy, each new face a reminder that Ye Cheng's house was more than a single heir. It was a rising dynasty. Once the Jianglin Gu family's senior officials arrived, they too made their way into the courtyard. Mu Ming's heart pounded with excitement. She kept up and froze in disbelief. Could that really be Miss Gu Chinger? Standing among the Kongming Gu family's prodigies was a young woman of ethereal beauty and composure, none other than Gu Chinger, the legendary genius Mu Ming had first heard of in the Black City. Never in her wildest dreams had Mu Ming imagined that this peerless talent served under His Highness Ye Cheng. If anyone of Chinger's caliber were free to choose, surely even a divine emperor or a supreme saint emperor would vie for her loyalty. And yet here she stood, apparently pledged to Lord Ye Cheng. Who was this Ye Cheng to command devotion from someone as remarkable as her? Before Mu Ming could puzzle it out, a warm, familiar laughter drifted over. It was her master, Chen Yun, strolling in from nearby. Chinger, Xier, how long has it been? You've both grown so much since we last met. Once the revered saintess of Chenxin Pavilion, Chen Yun now surveyed the assembled genius disciples with genuine delight. Mu Ming watched them, curiosity sparkling in her eyes, eager to discover the bond between the upstart Lord Ye Cheng and the incomparable Gu Chinger. Chen Yun and Ye Cheng already knew each other well. In fact, it was Chen Yun himself who had seen Ye Cheng and his sister, Gu Xier, off on the flying boat to Qianyu, Kangming Royal City, in the first place. Old Pavilion Master, it's been too long. Oh, Chen Yun called warmly as he came into view. Ye Cheng and Gu Xier both smiled, nostalgia flickering in their eyes. Then Chen Yun beckoned to a young woman standing nearby. Minger, come over and greet them. These two were once the pride of Chenxin Pavilion. Consider them your senior sisters. He gestured toward Ye Cheng and Gu Xier. This is Ye Cheng, and that's his sister, Gu Xier, and this is Mu Ming. Although her talent doesn't quite match theirs, it's still remarkably rare. Is that so? Ye Cheng exchanged a look with his sister. Both of them immediately sensed the powerful cultivation aura emanating from Mu Ming. She had already broken into the realm of calamity. They nodded, with genuine respect. Ye Cheng offered her an encouraging smile. Junior sister, train diligently under our master. You have great potential. Mu Ming bowed gratefully. Thank you both for your guidance, senior siblings. Mu Ming's cheeks burned. She felt as if she'd just met her idol, someone who'd not only acknowledged her, but even called her junior sister. She never dreamed she'd stand so close to the genius she admired. Only when Gu Qinger and Gu Xier drifted away did Mu Ming shake off her daze. She hurried over to Chen Yun, her voice trembling with excitement. Master, that was Gu Qinger, the peerless genius I've been telling you about. Chen Yun chuckled, amusement flickering in his eyes. She? A former disciple of our Chengqin Pavilion? How did we let such talent slip through our fingers? Mu Ming stared at him in disbelief. She really came from Chengqin Pavilion? Indeed, Chen Yun said, nodding. Qinger was with us long ago. Her natural aptitude was solid, upper mid-level at best, but nothing extraordinary. Her remarkable progress now? That's all thanks to His Highness Ye Cheng. His Highness Ye Cheng? Mu Ming echoed, astonished. His Highness Ye Cheng again? Mu Ming's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the newcomer. Before she could gather her thoughts, yet another wave of Kongming Gu clan prodigies appeared. Gu Qinger, Gu Qingcheng, Gu Nishang, and several others. Since Ye Cheng's breakthrough into the imperial realm, his innate talent had leapt to staggering new heights. His strength and cultivation now verged on the extraordinary. Mu Ming felt her heart pound at the sheer sight of them. A booming echo rolled in from the distance, diverting her attention upward. Two colossal flying vessels drifted closer. One flew the resplendent banner of Xuan Palace, the other bore the crest of the Shenmeng imperial family, reborn from the recent war's ashes. A crushing aura, a testament to both sects' Shenhuang-level might, radiated off the SAS. Hips. In every inn surrounding Yunhai Tower, Black City cultivators craned their necks, eyes wide with awe. Mu Ming fixed her gaze on the approaching sects. The Shenmeng imperial family's energy felt unfamiliar to her, but Xuan Palace, that name struck a chord. After Daluo Palace, the former overlord of the spiritual domain, was destroyed, Xuanhuang Palace had swiftly claimed its authority. Their arrival left no doubt. Xuan Palace still wielded immense power. Mu Ming felt her heart skip a beat. The head of this palace was none other than a great god emperor, and the entire sect now served under His Highness Ye Cheng. She stared at the two spirit boats drawing near. Then a thought struck her. Wait, didn't Daluo Palace fall because of some mysterious power working behind the Xuanhuang Palace master? She squinted across the water. Could Ye Cheng be that same powerhouse? Chen Yun, standing at her side, traced the boat's approach with a look of mingled awe and pride. At Mu Ming's speculation, his expression turned wry. Minger, you've outdone yourself this time. He sighed and ran a hand through his robes. His Highness Ye Cheng is indeed the very man who obliterated Daluo Palace. Mu Ming's eyes widened so widely she thought they might pop right out. She'd never imagined that Chengqin Pavilion, her own little sect, would earn the favor of such an astonishing figure. But when the cultivators from Xuanhuang Palace and Shenmeng Dynasty stepped down from the boats, their every gesture spelled nothing but utmost respect. In that instant, Mu Ming realized that, yes, this was exactly how it had to be. If their power truly wasn't enough to challenge the God Emperor, why would his sect's disciples treat them with such reverence? Mu Ming shook her head in amazement. Chengqin Pavilion really is on a roll. Standing beside her, Chen Yun chuckled softly. Already celebrating our luck? Isn't that a bit premature? Mu Ming frowned. Premature? Before Chen Yun could answer, a sudden rush of air swept through the courtyard. With a flicker of light, two figures appeared, Saint Xiang on the left and Saint Yunxiao on the right. Right behind them came the Tianzins of Tianshu Pavilion and the supreme giants of the venerable realm, all descending upon Black City. Instantly, every pair of eyes turned toward them. Mu Ming stared, speechless. Chen Yun and the others bowed deeply in unison. We pay our respects to Saint Qiang, Saint Yunxiao, and the venerable seniors of Tianshu Pavilion. Saint, Mu Ming whispered, utterly stunned. The two saints hovered calmly in the air, their presence so overwhelming that her mind went blank. Chapter 150. The venerables of Tianshu Pavilion swept into the courtyard with solemn grace, bowing in turn to acknowledge every sect present. As they entered, Mu Ming's scattered thoughts snapped back into focus. He recalled the complaints he had harbored not long before, how he'd scoffed that Chenshin Pavilion was merely a royal sect, how he'd sneered at the eldest daughter of the imperial clan for her supposed neediness. Now, confronted with these saint venerables, legends even within the spirit realm, giants just a step below the emperor, he felt a flush of shame. These were His Highness Ye Cheng's allies, dispatched at his command. Shameful? Not in the least. Rather, it was the greatest honor imaginable. Mu Ming glanced at his fellow disciples, eyes wide with reverence, and bowed his head in contrition. Pride had no place here. Standing to one side, Chen Yun watched the scene with a knowing smile. He remembered Ye Cheng's wedding banquet, when the Qiang Saint Venerable of Tianshu Pavilion had honored them with his presence. Back then, he and every member of Chenshin Pavilion had felt the same mixture of awe and disbelief. If I hadn't pledged myself to His Highness's banner, Chen Yun thought, how could I, merely a Xuan king, ever hope to stand among such titans? He shook his head, conviction steady in his heart. Aligning with Ye Cheng had been his wisest decision yet. Ye Cheng rose from his meditation just as activity stirred in the grand courtyard of Yunhai Tower. Pulling on his robes, he left his retreat and stepped into the cool morning air. Instantly, every subordinate, led by Saints Qiang and Yunxiao, fell into a crisp formation. At the center, they bowed as one. "Welcome, Pavilion Master Ye Cheng," they intoned. Ye Cheng returned their salute with a gentle wave. "Please, stand at ease. No need for such formality." When the last of them straightened, he addressed the assembly in a clear, even tone. "Today we depart for Ye Cheng. Before we face the ancient battlefield, I want each of you to become acquainted, to learn each other's strengths and weaknesses. In that crucible of battle, your comradeship will save your lives." A hush fell over the courtyard. Among the men and women gathered, a young guard named Mu Ming stared at their leader in astonishment. Tales of Pavilion Master Ye Cheng had reached even the lowest ranks, stories of a mighty figure revered by saints and giants alike. And yet, this master before him appeared barely older than himself. Slender, composed, with an almost boyish gentleness that belied the commanding presence he'd just displayed. Mu Ming swallowed hard. Around him, the others exchanged determined nods. He took a steadying breath and squared his shoulders. If this youthful lord could inspire saints and giants, then surely Mu Ming could find it within himself to live up to such expectations. Ye Cheng dismissed them with a final nod. "Gather your gear. We leave at once." With hearts alight and minds focused, the troops of Yunhai Tower prepared to march for Ye Cheng, and in time to prove their mettle on the fabled ancient battlefield. Ye Cheng stood on the deck of the family's shipyard, watching Qiang and Yunxiao bustle below him. "Get the Tianshu warship ready," he ordered. "In just half a day, the gateway to the ancient battlefield will open. We need to depart the moment it activates." Across the realm, in the sprawling Black City, Ye Cheng's younger sister, Gu Yunxi, strolled alongside him through crowded streets and lantern-lit alleys. Everywhere they went, makeshift martial arts arenas had been set up, gladiatorial pits where local fighters challenged one another for reputation and prize money. Eager for worthy opponents, the siblings darted from ring to ring, their eyes scanning for genuine talent. But after hours of watching display fights and testing novices, their hopes turned to disappointment. Wherever they looked, the so-called top prospects fared no better than ordinary scrubs. Yunxi kicked at a loose pebble, her brow furrowed. "Father promised this. City was crawling with prodigies," she complained. "All we've seen are washed-up has-beens." Ye Cheng folded his arms and let out a soft sigh. Though he kept his tone calm, his expression mirrored his sister's frustration. Just as Yunxi was about to add another sarcastic remark, Ye Cheng's eyes suddenly brightened. He straightened, took a step forward, and froze. "What is it?" Yunxi asked, following his gaze. Across the crowded square, a hush had fallen. All chatter died down as a lone figure climbed onto a raised platform, sword in hand, ready to face any challenger. The crowd leaned forward in anticipation. Ye Cheng's pulse quickened. At last, here was a fighter worth watching, and perhaps worth challenging. Isn't that Sister Yan? Yan Mengqi? Gu Yunxi's heart skipped a beat. She followed her brother Gu Yecheng's gaze and recognized the familiar figures from Fuhai sect and Lanyue Palace. The very cultivators she'd seen when Gu Yecheng ventured into the Xuanhuang secret realm. Lanyue Palace, they've come too? She whispered. She knew the half-king sect had ties to her brother, but she never imagined they'd dare enter this fray. Then again, the outer reaches of the ancient battlefield offered irresistible allure. Though the deeper ruins bristled with danger, the perimeter lay within reach of Tribulation Realm cultivators. And any treasure unearthed there, no matter how modest, could be a relic of a great king, more than enough to swell a semi-king sect's coffers. No doubt the palace master and his disciple Yan Mengqi, still calling Gu Yecheng brother, had come for precisely that prize. Yet even as they pressed forward, they kept their guard up, well aware of their own limitations. Gu Yecheng watched as only Yan Mengqi had been sent from Lanyue Palace, traveling in tandem with several semi-king sects from the Fuhai region. From his hidden vantage point, he recognized the familiar banner of Lanyue Palace, but Yan Mengqi, still dutifully trailing her palace master, hadn't spotted him yet. A flicker of anxiety passed over her features. Not long ago, thanks to Gu Yecheng's covert support, all the Fuhai powers had accepted Lanyue Palace as the foremost force in the Fuhai Sea. After all, a king-level champion backing the palace was a rare and fearsome asset. Under the protection of the mighty Tianming sect, Lanyue Palace had gone unchallenged. Even Tianming's ancient rival had been compelled to present lavish tribute and sue for peace rather than risk Lanyue's ire. That uneasy peace, however, had shattered only days before. In a sudden turn, the Tianming sect itself had been elevated to king-level status. Their initial bow of submission and all those generous gifts? Merely a cautious gambit born of dread for Lanyue's hidden patron. Now that Tianming wielded true king-level authority of its own, who could say what new alliances or rivalries might form, and what threat they might pose to Lanyue Palace and to Gu Yecheng's intricate plans? Now that the Tianming sect enjoyed the backing of a true king-level faction, it had boldly resumed its schemes. With the ancient battlefield about to open, they dared not waste the chance to probe and weaken their rivals, at least not until everyone returned. After that, they would settle old scores. Even if they shrank from open conflict, they would undoubtedly employ covert methods. As Yan Mengqi watched the distant peaks where the battlefield's rifts formed, she whispered a silent prayer. If only I can unearth one or two genuine trump cards in the ancient battlefield, then perhaps the Tianming sect will think twice before making any rash moves. She toyed with the idea of asking Gu Yecheng for help. After all, he had already risked himself once to defend Lanyue Palace, but the memory of that debt left her cheeks too warm to call on him again. Lost in her anxious thoughts, she nearly missed the voice that drifted toward her on the wind. "Sister Yan, you're here too?" Startled, she looked up to see a familiar figure stepping through the mist. "Xiaochen," she breathed. Gu Yecheng Hao, Ted a few paces away, equally surprised. They had not met in many months, and both their hearts fluttered at the unexpected reunion. Those accompanying Lanyue Palace from the Fuhai sect watched with keen interest as two young figures approached, the siblings Gu Yecheng and Gu Yunxi. They all knew the rumors. Lanyue Palace's meteoric rise was said to stem from Chief Yan Mengqi's friendship with a certain scion of a king-tier family, a connection that had bound the palace to that mysterious powerhouse. Now that Yan Mengqi was treating Gu Yecheng with such deference, no one needed an introduction. The truth was plain to see. It appears this is the fabled young master himself, one senior Fuhai sect disciple murmured, bows of respect already forming in his gesture. Others around him exchanged knowing glances. At that moment, footsteps sounded from the path ahead. A procession led by the head of the Tianming sect emerged. The sect leader called out in a clear voice, "Palace Master Yan Mengqi, members of the Fuhai sect, I've been looking for you." Chapter 151. The Tianming Sect. Master's lips curved into a subtle smile, his eyes betraying neither disdain nor hostility, but genuine curiosity. He studied Gu Yunxi and young Gu Yecheng as if searching their faces for hidden truths. Observing how respectfully Master Lanyue treated the children, he quietly put the pieces together, and found himself thoroughly surprised. Though the Tianming sect now counted a king-level power among its patrons, that alliance had come with strict conditions. Their benefactor demanded that the sect rapidly bring all of Fuhai under its rule and carry out certain special assignments within its borders. Bound by honor and obligation, the sect master could not refuse. Yet even with royal backing promised, he was not one to act rashly. He resolved to uncover the true identity and motives of the force supporting Lanyu Palace. Once he thoroughly understood their strength and intentions, he would devise a plan, and then lead his disciples out of Black City toward the ancient battlefield. The journey to the Dream Mist was anything but smooth. That ominous veil of swirling fog could only be crossed atop a king-level flying boat. Any lesser vessel would succumb to its maddening influence. Fortunately for Tianming sect, their leader enjoyed the patronage of a king-level sect that owned exactly such a craft. Not only did he secure passage for himself, but he also arranged a handful of extra seats expressly for the guests from Lanyue Palace. Once Lanyue Palace's representatives stepped aboard, the senior masters of the king-level sect would be there to see them off, and, more to the point, to pry into their true origins. At first, the Tianming sect leader had feared the Lanyue entourage might refuse the invitation, leaving him with no means to probe their secrets. But fortune favors the bold. He soon discovered that two mysterious young siblings, rumored to belong to the very king-level power backing Lanyue Palace, were traveling by ordinary means. It was the perfect opportunity. He would summon the great masters of his patron sect right here and now. There'd be no need for those siblings to board the flying boat. A single glance from those exalted elders would unmask their heritage in an instant. With his plan falling neatly into place, the Tianming sect leader allowed himself a thin smile. The Dream Mist crossing promised to be as treacherous as ever, but under the watchful eyes of king-level sect masters, the true peril for Lanyue Palace lay not in the fog ahead, but in the revelations that awaited them. The Tianming sect leader thought for a moment, then sent out a telepathic summons. He ordered his elders to invite every influential ally of the prominent families, and, at the same time, he reached out to Lanyue Palace and the other minor Fuhai sects, urging them to join his escort and buy precious time. "We appreciate your offer, sect leader," Lanyue Palace's head replied coolly. Her voice was polite but unyielding. "Still, we prefer to travel on our own." The other Fuhai sects, however, were not so proud. Though they'd remained neutral in the rivalry between Lanyue Palace and Tianming sect, a free passage on a king-class spirit vessel was hard to refuse. Compared to the alternative, boarding the Black City Chamber of Commerce's flying boats, notorious for preying on small sects and half-kings, they knew which offer was sweeter. One by one, they accepted the Tianming sect leader's invitation. Riding alongside him, they even lent their voices to persuade the reluctant master of Lanyue Palace. The Tianming sect leader allowed himself a satisfied smile. His greatest worry had been that the Lanyue Palace master would simply flee, and now that fear was put to rest. Ye Cheng kept a firm hold on the Lanyue Palace master, buying precious seconds for the adults rushing up behind him. The Tianming sect master's eyes gleamed with triumph. He was sure their captive was theirs at last. But Xianxia, standing beside Ye Cheng, saw the situation slipping out of the palace master's control and spoke up at once. "Miss Yan, Palace Master," he called, "if you'd rather not go with the Tianming sect, you're welcome to join us. Our family's flying boat is ready to depart." "Is that allowed?" both Lanyue Palace Master and Yan Mengqi asked, surprise etched on their faces. Gu Qingchen and Gu Yunxi exchanged a glance and nodded. With their family standing behind them, reserving 2 seats was effortless. Relief washed over Lanyue Palace Master and Yan Mengqi at once. Furious, the Tianming sect master opened his mouth to object. Stalling them was precisely what Gu Qingchen was doing. But before he could utter a word, Gu Qingchen raised his hand and announced, "Our spiritual vessel awaits. Miss Yan, Palace Master, please come aboard." At his command, Yan Mengqi and Lanyue Palace Master, along with the nearby Fuhai sect masters and even the Tianming disciples, looked up. Compelled by Gu Qingchen's quiet authority, they turned and made their way toward the waiting flying boat. Boom, boom, boom. The void trembled and hummed as a colossal warship slowly lifted off at the far edge of Black City, in the direction of Yunhai Tower. Under the awestruck gazes of the assembled cultivators, the 10,000-foot-long vessel, an advanced, 6th-level spiritual ship on par with the Saint Venerable realm, swept across the sky with overwhelming presence. Its immense shadow engulfed the streets below, drawing every eye in the city. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Is that the overlord vessel of Qianyu from the saintly Taoist sect's Tianshu Pavilion? Tianshu worship? The saintly Taoist sect? Even leaders of the major semi-king sects in Fuhai and the head of the Tianming sect stood frozen, stunned into silence. The saintly Taoist sect was a legend, a true dragon in the heavens. By comparison, they felt no more significant than dust motes. Whispers spread. Qianyu domain was vast, and now its might was on full display above Black City. The renown of the Tianshu Pavilion extended far beyond the Qianyu cultivators. Did you know? Someone whispered. Both deputy pavilion masters of Tianshu Pavilion are supreme giants in the Saint Venerable realm. And that 10,000-foot warship they travel in, that's the standard patrol vessel for a deputy pavilion master. They call it the Tianshu warship. It's a 6th-tier advanced spirit boat. Even an ordinary supreme giant in the Saint Venerable realm would be like an ant beneath it, crushed in an instant. As the rumors spread through the crowd, envy flickered in countless eyes. Palace Master Lanyue, Sect Master Tianming, and the commanders of the nearby Fuhai forces were no exception. Just being here, even if we gain nothing from this ancient battlefield, murmured one Fuhai sect master, our horizons will be broadened tenfold. Palace Master Lanyue and Sect Master Tianming exchanged sympathetic nods. After all, a supreme giant of the Saint Venerable realm could, if they willed it, obliterate every sect in the entire spirit realm in the blink of an eye. They sighed in unison, marveling at how a single pavilion could wield such overwhelming power. Yan Mengqi blinked in surprise. Where had the Yunxi siblings gone? Huh? Where's brother Ye Cheng? She whispered. Her master, Palace Master Lanyue, echoed her bewilderment. What's happening here? Before anyone could answer, the two Yunxi siblings reappeared a short distance away and strode purposefully toward the waiting Tianshu warship. As if in response to their approach, the vessel descended gracefully, its hull radiating a soft, golden light. A column of guiding brilliance shot out from its entrance, illuminating the path below. Ye Cheng pressed forward, waving energetically at the crew. Another ray of light slid out to meet him, forming a clear bridge to the ship. Then he turned back, grinning at Yan Mengqi and Palace Master Lanyue. Sister Yan, come on, everything's ready, let's go! Murmurs rippled through the gathered cultivators. Yan Mengqi glanced at Master Lanyue, both of them poised at the edge of the beam, hearts pounding with anticipation. With a determined nod, Yan Mengqi stepped onto the glowing path and followed Ye Cheng toward the Tianshu warship, leaving the astonished onlookers behind. Chapter 152. Watch closely. The moment Ye Cheng spoke, Palace Master Lanyue and the Fuhai cultivators around him snapped out of their daze. Their throats went dry as they stared at the descending Tianshu warship, unable to look away. Earlier, they had followed Ye Cheng's signal and turned to observe what he called his spirit boat, just as the Tianshu warship happened into view. None of them, including Yan Mengqi, had suspected that the two were one and the same. They'd assumed it was a lucky coincidence. Now, however, the truth revealed itself. A guiding spirit light descended before Palace Master Lanyue and Yan Mengqi, and the Yunxi siblings stepped back aboard the great vessel under its glow, fully illuminated for everyone to see. Lanyue and Yan Mengqi stood rooted in place, minds blank with shock. They didn't fully come to their senses until they themselves stepped onto the deck of the Tianshu warship, standing among Ye Cheng and his disciples. Even then, the wonder hadn't faded. Though they'd long suspected Ye Cheng's background was extraordinary, nothing had prepared them for this moment. Ye Cheng's talent had always been conspicuous, but nobody could have guessed his true pedigree. To learn that he was the direct heir of the Saint Venerable sent shockwaves through every cultivated mind present. Before this moment, the most generous speculation among the elders of Lanyue Palace had been that he was merely the scion of the Heavenly King, or at best, the God King. Now, all of that paled in comparison to the startling truth. The great Tianshu warship hovered above the clearing, its immense bulk glowing with runic light. At a silent command, it began its ascent, carrying Ye Cheng, the Gu family's cultivators, and a retinue of loyal vassals into the sky. Those left behind watched in stunned silence as the ship receded into the clouds. Master Tianming of the Tianming sect stood rooted to the spot, his face as pale as the moon. It took all his effort to tear his gaze away. When at last the warship vanished, he exhaled a long, shuddering breath, relief flooding through him. Had he allowed himself to be goaded into reckless action just now, he would have condemned himself, and perhaps countless innocents, to a fate worse than death. He clenched his fists, vowing silently, "Once I return, the first thing I must do is report this to my master." Master Tianming's thoughts remained hidden behind his impassive expression, but his unspoken command was clear. Lanyue Palace must not be provoked. We can only approach them in friendship, nothing less would do. Below them, the void yawned into endless blackness. Above, the great wooden decking of the Tianshu warship creaked underfoot. A pale breeze riffled the Tianshu standard as Ye Cheng led Yan Mengqi, her younger brother, Master Lanyue, and his young attendant across the gangway and aboard the legendary Holy Spirit boat. Yan Mengqi pressed her palm to her mouth, scarcely daring to believe her eyes. I never thought you'd manage to get us on a Tianshu warship," she whispered, voice trembling with awe. She stared up at the fluttering banner. The twin swords woven into the pavilion's crest were unmistakable. Ye Cheng paused and glanced at her, his dark eyes calm. "Sister Yan, you've misunderstood," he said softly. "I'm not a disciple of Tianshu Pavilion." Her gasp echoed in the hushed hold. Master Lanyue stared at Ye Cheng in stunned silence, disbelief etched into every line of his face. If this young man wasn't one of Tianshu Pavilion's own, then by what right had he brought them here? A heavy silence settled over the little group as the warship pitched gently on the void wind. Questions swirled like mist around them, and not one answer lay in sight. Ye Cheng blinked and spoke in a matter-of-fact tone. "My father isn't just the young master of the Gu clan, he's the pavilion master of Tianshu Pavilion." Yan Mengqi and the Lanyue Palace master both went silent, eyes widening. Tianshu Pavilion? Pavilion master? They had assumed Ye Cheng's background was already extraordinary. After all, only a true disciple of Tianshu Pavilion would warrant a warship's hospitality for two untested guests. Yet his lineage proved far grander than they'd imagined. If his father truly headed the pavilion, then his younger brother Xianxia must be the future young master of the Saint Venerable Taoist lineage, they murmured in astonishment. Outside, the Tianshu warship resumed its steady advance toward the ancient battlefield's gates on Black City's outskirts. No sooner had it vanished into the distance than another spirit boat appeared on the horizon, racing to overtake its predecessor. Compared to the Tianshu warship, this spirit boat looked downright shabby, a run-of-the-mill, fourth-level vessel. Even at its strongest, it was only a mid-fourth-tier craft, roughly on par with a heavenly king realm cultivator. After witnessing the Tianshu warship's awe-inspiring power, none of the onlookers paid this boat the slightest attention, until the Tianming sect's leader suddenly recognized it. "This is the very spirit boat we secured favor with," he exclaimed. "It belongs to the Sun family of Juming Island, renowned throughout the Wanyao Sea for their golden thigh lineage and a heavenly king realm ancestor. The clan's boat has arrived. Everybody, hurry," the Tianming sect master called, leading his disciples forward. At his signal, the Sun family's chief guided the vessel down to the gathering. But as the gangplank touched the ground, he frowned. Where was Lanyue Palace's master, who was supposed to be accompanying the sect master? Patriarch Sun's brow tightened. "What's happening? You assured me Lanyue Palace and its mysterious backer would be here, so why can't I see either of them?" Tianming sect master Shu bowed his head, speaking cautiously. "Your Majesty, I'm afraid their patrons simply spirited Lanyue Palace away." Sun's anger flared, but he bit back a retort. He recalled how prudent Master Shu was. He wouldn't claim this without good reason. Suppressing his irritation, he pressed on. "Their backer must be exceptionally formidable, not merely a king-level clan, but are you suggesting a god king stands behind them?" Master Shu's lips twitched in a wry smile. "A god king? If one truly stood here, would you not have seen his warship? When you arrived, wasn't the Tianshu flagship impossible to miss?" "Of course I saw it," Sun admitted. the great warship of the overlord of Qianyu, the flagship of the Saint Venerable Taoist sect. How could anyone overlook something like that? Wait, the moment the Tianming sect master spoke, the Sun family leader froze, his eyes narrowing in sudden understanding. Are you saying the Tianshu Pavilion is the true power behind Lanyu Palace? The sect master nodded gravely. Shock swept through the Sun family leader like a tidal wave. He stared out at the spot where the Tianshu warship had vanished over the horizon, his mind reeling. It took him several breaths to steady himself. Inside, he felt immense relief. Had their vassal, the Tianming sect master, been reckless, the Sun family might already be at war with Lanyu Palace. But that disciplined caution had saved them from a devastating conflict. Recalling the raw, overwhelming might he'd glimpsed aboard the warship, he couldn't help but shudder. This was the force of a saint-level sect, an enemy too formidable to provoke. They wouldn't even have to make a move to obliterate anyone who dared stand in their way. The shockwave left in the Tianshu warship's wake as it tore through the void would be more than enough to reduce the Tianming sect and every last scion of the Jueming Island lineage to ashes. Chapter 153. Boom! The Tianshu warship cleaved through the heavens, its colossal hull like a coiling dragon tearing across the boundless sea of stars. Within moments, it hovered before the ancient battlefield's gateway. A cluster of Taoist spirit boats had already assembled there, but at the sight of the warship, they immediately yielded, clearing a direct path to the nearest void gate. On deck, Ye Cheng surveyed his disciples with calm intensity. "Once we enter the battlefield," he announced, "each of you will be scattered randomly around its perimeter. Reunion won't be guaranteed, and if you're unlucky, it could take days or even weeks to find one another again. That's why I'm giving each of you a sword talisman." He held up a slender jade token etched with runes. These talismans let you sense each other's presence within a 10,000-mile radius, no matter how the battlefield's portals shuffle you. As he spoke, he passed out the tokens to his vassals, who clasped them reverently. When he reached Yunxi's brother and sister, he lingered, placing 3 additional talismans, each infused with natal essence, into their hands. "These special talismans aren't just for tracking," he explained. "They grant brief protection against attacks even from venerable tier adversaries. Think of them as extra lifelines. Use them wisely." The disciples bowed and affixed their talismans, robes fluttering in the void wind rising around the portal. Ye Cheng stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Behind him, the warship's engines thrummed, ready to plunge them into the heart of the ancient conflict. "Steady yourselves," he commanded softly. "Our true trial begins the moment we cross this threshold." With that, the warship surged into the gaping entrance, light and wind collapsing around them, and the ancient battlefield swallowed them whole. However, his children's sword talismans were in a league of their own. These were natal talismans that Ye Cheng had painstakingly refined with his own essence and blood, powerful enough to fell an ordinary Xuanzun. Once activated, no matter how vast the distance across the ancient battlefield, even if they were separated by thousands and thousands of miles, Ye Cheng could instantly pinpoint Yunxi and his brother's location and rush to their aid. "Thank you for this gift." The vassals, Chen Yun most of all, broke into cheers. With such a talisman protecting them, even if they were scattered at random upon entry into the battlefield, they now had a real chance to hold out until they could regroup with other powerful allies. Moved by their excitement, Yunxi and his brother bowed deeply to Ye Cheng. "Thank you, father, for this treasure." Ye Cheng smiled and waved them off gently. "There's no need for formalities, you two, but hear me out." His expression grew serious. "Your strength is impressive, yet you are still only in the king realm. Life and death trials are necessary, but you must never exceed your limits or act recklessly. Do you all understand?" "Yes, father. Don't worry, we'll protect our brother." Yunxi puffed out her chest and clasped her small fist, suddenly all grown up and serious. Beside her, Qingchen opened his mouth to protest that he could handle himself, but a single sharp look from his sister shut him up. He could only stand there, nursing a pout, and nod in reluctant agreement. Ye Cheng couldn't help the amused smile that curved his lips as he watched his children's antics. Just then, a low, resonant hum rolled across the valley. At the entrance to the ancient battlefield, the last strands of forbidden light that had formed the magical barrier winked out. In their place, a colossal vortex, nearly 1,000 feet wide, tore open the sky. The entrance is open! A wave of excitement surged through the gathered cultivators. Spirit boats and individuals alike shot into the air, racing toward the churning portal. With a decisive nod, Ye Cheng led his own team forward and stepped into the vortex, determination blazing in his eyes. Boom! A pulse of teleportation energy ripped through reality, and the world spun wildly around him. When the dizziness subsided, Ye Cheng found himself standing on a vast, windswept plain. The air tasted of dust and old blood, a remnant of battles fought countless years ago. Before him stretched an endless battlefield, its yellow sands shifting under a cold, uncaring wind. At his feet, half buried in those dunes, lay a shattered guqin. Its cracked wooden frame protruded from the sand like a broken spine, and the few remaining strings fluttered in the breeze, producing faint, haunting echoes. Most of the cultivators who had been teleported here alongside him barely spared the instrument a glance. They surged forward, eager to explore this strange new realm. Only Ye Cheng paused, his dark eyes narrowing as he studied the relic. With his divine consciousness, he sensed an extraordinary aura radiating from the guqin, an aura no commonplace instrument could possess. Its craftsmanship was too refined, its spiritual residue too potent. He could tell at a glance that this was no mere broken heirloom, but a high-grade spiritual weapon, its level at least 5th tier advanced. Silently, Ye Cheng knelt and swept his hand over the exposed wood, gently brushing away the golden sand. Each grain that fell revealed more of the guqin's intricate inlays, patterns of dragons and clouds carved long ago with meticulous care. He could already feel a connection tugging at his spirit, as if the instrument itself yearned to be whole again under his hands. He inhaled sharply, heart pounding with anticipation. Beyond the horizon lay untold dangers and opportunities. But first, he would claim this priceless treasure. With a steady breath, Ye Cheng reached out and cradled the guqin in his arms. Ye Cheng knelt in the sun-baked dunes, extending his consciousness into the shifting sands beneath him. A slender ribbon of spiritual force coalesced at his fingertips. With a soft tug, the grains parted, and an ancient zither slid free with a muted buzz. At once, a faint, mysterious aura pulsed from the instrument. The intricate spirit array carved into its surface lay shattered, the zither itself no longer fit for musical cultivation. Yet the wood, Wutong's spirit wood of the 5th rank, was astonishingly intact. He could dismantle it entirely and recraft its fibers into a weapon worthy of the imperial armory. No sooner had he lifted the relic than nearby cultivators, who'd scarcely spared him a glance a moment before, paused in mid-stride. They clustered around him now, eyes alight with covetous awe. "Wutong's spirit wood, 5th rank," one murmured. "A material like that can yield an imperial-grade artifact. He's found it buried in the dunes," another breathed. Their whispered excitement rippled through the group. Ye Cheng himself felt a thrill of surprise. He'd only detected the faintest trace of residual energy, never dreaming the core would be so pristine. He weighed the zither in his hands, its ancient timbers humming with latent power. In the unforgiving desert, fortune had smiled on him and set every cultivator nearby on edge. Though Ye Cheng no longer needed the 5th-level spirit material for himself, he slipped it into his satchel nonetheless. He could always exchange it for a handsome sum of spirit stones and refined crystals later. "Let's see what price this fetches," he murmured under his breath. He exhaled quietly and cast his gaze over the cultivators watching from the edge of the clearing. One figure in particular drew his attention, a slender girl draped in a silken veil. Even through the fine fabric, her poise and grace were unmistakable. Her eyes, bright with curiosity, tracked his every move. If Nalan Qingyuan happened to be present, she would have recognized this veiled beauty at a glance. None other than her dear friend Sheng Zhiling, master of Xingluo Peak, one of the Imperial Palace's 8 spirit peaks, and a proud scion of the noble Sheng clan. Is his success just luck, or is he truly gifted? Sheng Zhiling wondered, arching an eyebrow. She drew in a slow breath, zeroing in on Ye Cheng. A broken royal spiritual weapon held little allure for someone of her standing. What captivated her was the precision with which he had unearthed that ancient zither earlier. His movements hadn't seemed the product of chance, but of careful calculation, as if he had known the relic concealed far more than met the eye. Sheng Jiling's curiosity was just beginning to stir when a hoarse, unsettling laugh drifted in from the distance. "Good luck! Ha ha! Kid, you're speaking too soon." Before anyone could react, a frail figure sailed through the air and came to hover in front of them. He looked like a shriveled piece of driftwood, gaunt, his face long and hollowed, his gray robe so threadbare it seemed as if a strong gust might tear it apart. Yet as he settled before the group, the assembled monks froze in shock, and then one of them whispered in disbelief, "Is that the Withered Bones Taoist?" The Withered Bones Taoist? The name sent a ripple of pale fear through the crowd. Even Sheng Jiling's eyes widened. Tales of this fearsome cultivator were everywhere. He had ascended to the level of Heavenly Emperor and mastered a brutal technique that weaponizes the very blood of his foes. When unleashed, its devastating force could fell even a mighty god emperor. Though he walked the realms at his own leisure, wherever he went, death and ruin followed in his wake. Now here he was, standing unannounced before them all. Taoist Kugu's lips curled into a triumphant smile as he took in the fearful faces around him. Well, someone recognizes me." "That's unexpected," he drawled, his gaze settling on Ye Cheng. "Boy, did you hear what they're saying? Hand over that ancient zither now, or be the first head I claim on this battlefield." A shiver passed through the assembled cultivators. Many looked at Ye Cheng with pity. After all, discovering treasures here means nothing if you lack the power to keep them. In this ancient arena, the weak don't just miss out, they become prime targets. Lose a fight, and you might pay with your life. Even Sheng Jiling's sympathetic glance drifted toward him. Instead of fear, Ye Cheng felt a surge of amusement. He laughed softly, the sound surprisingly light. He met Taoist Kugu's threatening stare with an easy confidence. Despite the monk's words and the crowd's pity, he felt far from beaten. Ye Cheng didn't rush in to strike. Instead, he quietly sealed his spiritual power and feigned awe before the Taoist monk. With all the solemnity he could muster, he held out the ancient zither and offered it without hesitation. The other disciples fell silent, averting their gazes. No one was surprised. Under the pressure of Taoist Kugu's presence, none of them would dare defy him. After all, no treasure, however priceless, is worth one's life. Taoist Kugu accepted the zither and slipped it into his storage ring with a flick of his wrist. He regarded Ye Cheng with a faint, proud smile. "You're a sensible lad. Well done." Ye Cheng bowed respectfully, then raised his head and spoke again, voice steady. "Since I have presented the ancient zither to you, senior, might I dare ask a small favor in return?" Taoist Kugu's eyes, sunken like withered hollows, flashed a momentary murderous glint. In his opinion, sparing Ye Cheng's life was reward enough. This brash youth, did he not know his place? Yet Kugu was in a good mood, and his curiosity was piqued. He narrowed his eyes and replied coolly, "Very well, speak your request." The cultivators around them were already beginning to scatter, intending to abandon the fallen treasure and save their own skins. Yet the moment Ye Cheng spoke, they all froze and spun back, eyes wide as if they'd seen a specter. He'd surrendered the prize. Why wasn't he fleeing? Why risk provoking the fearsome Withered Bones Taoist now? Even Sheng Jiling hurried forward, his hand shooting out to pull Ye Cheng back. True, Ye Cheng showed no remarkable power, but his demeanor carried an unspoken dignity, truth, and Sheng Jiling couldn't bear to see him cut down. When the crowd's agitation reached its peak, Ye Cheng's voice cut through the chaos, calm and unwavering. "My request is simple. I wish only to borrow your head, senior." His tone was so composed that it sounded deafening, like a clap of thunder in their ears. Faces went pale. They stared at him, mouths agape, convinced they'd misunderstood. Borrow his head? Was he mad? Even the Withered Bones Taoist, whose reputation for merciless slaughter was known far and wide, paused mid-attack, his mind rattled by Ye Cheng's audacious words. Ye Cheng's chuckle turned to a harsh bark as he straightened his back and fixed the dried bones Taoist with a mocking stare. "Boy, what did you just say?" the Taoist demanded, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. "What did I say?" Ye Cheng feigned innocence, lips curling into a lazy smile. "My ears must be going. I said, let me borrow this old dog's skull for a moment." The Taoist's composure shattered at once. His eyes reddened, veins bulging in his forehead. "You insolent brat, speak once more like that, and I'll show you what death feels like." With a guttural roar, the Taoist summoned his spiritual power. Suddenly the air around him solidified into an immense, suffocating weight, as if a mountain had descended upon Ye Cheng, crushing the very life from his lungs. "You've gone too far, boy," the Taoist hissed, looming over him. "Don't blame me for what comes next." Before the threat could finish, horror flickered across his eyes. The assembled monks gasped and took a step back. In that instant, Ye Cheng advanced with unhurried grace. He drew his sword in one fluid motion and carved through the oppressive aura. The crack of steel against spirit was like thunder. In that single, decisive slash, the dried bones Taoist's power shattered, and the mountain of dread collapsed into dust. In a single, calculated stroke, Ye Cheng turned the infamous withered bone Taoist to ash. All that remained of the old sorcerer were fragments of his ancient zither and the jade-encrusted ring that held his life's savings. With a faint lift of his hand, Ye Cheng caught the ring as it floated down into his palm. Chapter 154. Is this real? Was that the bone-dried Taoist? He's dead? I must be dreaming. He was a heavenly emperor-level powerhouse. A stunned murmur swept through the cultivators. Their eyes widened, trembling with a mixture of awe and dread as they fell silent before Ye Cheng. Even Xianxia couldn't hide her shock. With a single, perfectly honed strike, this pale-robed swordsman had slain the legendary bone-dried Taoist, long famed for martial prowess that skirted the very edge of heavenly emperor perfection. What then must Ye Cheng's true strength be? A peak heavenly emperor, or perhaps even a god emperor in disguise? Regardless of his exact rank, the sheer brilliance of his feat lit up the entire courtyard. Many high cultivators cloak their centuries of practice behind youthful visages, but those with sharp spiritual perception, or who have attained lofty realms, can still sense the truth beneath the facade. Born and raised within the imperial palace, Xianxia possessed just such insight. She knew without doubt that no ordinary teenager could wield such overwhelming power. Though Xianxia's own cultivation was far from advanced, the moment she met Ye Cheng, she sensed at once that under the imperial palace's mental refinement technique, he bore no trace of age. In other words, he could not be significantly older than she was. Perhaps he was even of her own generation. "This can't be real," she whispered, astonished. When had such a prodigy emerged in southern Shenzhou? She found herself involuntarily comparing him to the prince of her native Yuhang imperial palace, and the contrast was staggering. Not even the imperial palace's heir, nor the famed prince of the Guardian sect, who'd long been celebrated across the 3,000 realms, could hold a candle to Ye Cheng. Xianxia's thoughts raced. Even when this ancient battlefield opens and draws the greatest cultivators, those secret geniuses hidden and nurtured by ancient masters, none will match him. She watched Ye Cheng's figure recede into the distance, utterly unable to tear her gaze away. Only after many heartbeats did the shock within her begin to ebb. Xianxia pressed her palms together, determination in her eyes. "When I see Qingyuan later, I must speak with her directly." She suspected the Nalan family had been whispering about Qingyuan ever since word spread of the Guardian of Heaven's son. Soon, Qingyuan would show them exactly what she was capable of, and let them know that in all the southern realms there's more than one true prodigy. That guardian heir wouldn't even be worthy of polishing this Taoist brother's boots. A flash of realization struck Xianxia. Good heavens, I never even asked his name. She glanced around urgently, but Ye Cheng was nowhere to be seen. Frustration flickered behind her veil, faintly tinting her cheeks. She tried to steady herself. The memory of him remained vivid, the effortless grace with which his sword sliced through the air, as if severing bone-dry branches, the serene confidence in his eyes. Once you've stood before a boundless sea, every other pool seems shallow. After witnessing such a genius, how could any peer of his generation hope to catch her attention? Under her veil, Xianxia's heart trembled at the thought. Ye Cheng, unaware of Xianxia's girlish daydreams, had already strode off. He emerged from the endless desert and found himself facing a vast canyon littered with rotting, broken swords, the infamous Sword Burial Gorge. Legend held that in ages past, a human emperor famed for his mastery of the blade and his disciples had fought to the death here against demons from the outer realms. By the might of a single sect, they had held back a 1,000,000-strong demon horde for 3 long months, buying precious time for the Shenzhou Dao sect and the world beyond. Stretching over 100,000 li, the gorge itself stands as a haunting reminder of that cataclysmic war. Standing at the canyon's edge, Ye Cheng gazed into the distance, his eyes rowing with purpose. His gift for the sword was extraordinary. Born with the 8th grade Vermilion fate and blessed by the Chaos Sword body, he had begun with a 1,000% bonus to his comprehension of the sword domain. As his cultivation deepened, that bonus had soared to a staggering 50,000%. Now poised before this monument to ancient bloodshed, his soul thrummed with anticipation for the trials and the power that lay ahead. Blessed by the heavenly refining saint body and wielding extraordinarily strong divine consciousness, Ye Cheng could appraise sword intent at a single glance. As he scanned the lingering energy in Burial Sword Gorge, his brow tightened. "He's reached the realm of sword heart," he murmured. In the hierarchy of sword intent, practitioners first advance through human sword, earth sword, and heaven sword. Beyond heaven sword lies sword heart, and above that is sword power. The stages beyond sword power remain untouched, even by Ye Cheng. Legend says that a cultivator who attains sword power can, with a single strike, carve out a vast world within the void and give birth to countless spirits of heaven and earth from their sword intent, a feat so profound it defies imagination. Each major realm is further divided into 3 grades: lesser triumph, greater triumph, and perfection. For any swordsman, merely breaching the art realm, even at the basic human sword level, is a remarkable achievement. Once a cultivator breaks into the Dao Zun realm, their power alone can rival entire factions. But beyond the human sword conception lies an even mightier peak, the Earth Sword. Mastering it multiplies one's combat prowess multiple times over, but the path to its comprehension is fraught with nearly insurmountable difficulty. In most cases, only those blessed with extraordinary talent in swordplay can grasp the human sword, and climbing from there to the Earth Sword demands not just unparalleled insight, but the full backing of one's cultivation realm. Legends even say that none may fathom the Earth Sword without first ascending to the rank of Venerable. Yunxiao Shengzun, Ye Cheng's most formidable retainer and one of the 2 vice pavilion masters of Tianshu Pavilion, is one of the rare few who have touched the Earth Sword's mysteries. Though he has only achieved a minor breakthrough, the sword intent he wields already dwarfs that of any peer in his realm. His prowess has earned him a single fearsome title, Invincible under the Dao Zun. Emperor Canaan is famed as the premier sword cultivator of southern Shenzhou, yet even his sword intent peaks at the heavenly sword level. Ye Cheng, by contrast, had already reached heavenly sword long before he set foot in the emperor realm. Since then, through one life-or-death clash after another, his sword intent grew still further, and on the eve of entering the ancient battlefield, it ascended to sword heart, the tier just above heavenly sword. In terms of raw swordsmanship, Ye Cheng now stands eye to eye with Emperor Canaan, and may even have surpassed him. He let out a slow breath that stirred the misty air, his gaze fixed on the distant buried sword gorge, a spark of excitement in his dark eyes. Legends spoke of its sword intent, sword heart above heavenly sword, flowing like an invisible torrent through every rock and crevice. If he could attune himself to it, perhaps he'd shatter his current limits. With that resolve, he vanished in a flash and reappeared within the gorge. It didn't take long for him to find the perfect retreat, a narrow ledge protruding from the right cliff face halfway down the gorge, high above the rushing stream below. There, he would test his sword intent against the ancient power that pulsed all around him. Ye Cheng rose onto the highest viewing platform, where he could take in the whole of buried sword gorge and feel its lingering sword intent as if it were mist dancing on the wind. With a soft rustle of his robes, he settled into a cross-legged posture and closed his eyes. Drawing upon the might of the heavenly refining saint body and the chaos sword technique, he dimmed the world around him. Within the boundless sea of his consciousness, the sword marks of the gorge reappeared, visions of 1,000 ancient swordmasters, each performing signature techniques in perfect harmony. Wave after wave of sword chi poured into his mind like a surging tide, cleansing and tempering the raw projection of intent he had painstakingly forged. As the torrent of swordsmanship refined his inner blade, the emblem of the heavenly sword, once a hazy silhouette, gradually assumed crystalline clarity. Every intricate engraving gleamed with newfound power. Time lost all meaning in that silent crucible. Moments stretched into timeless expanse as Ye Cheng's understanding deepened. Then, with a soft vibration that resonated through both body and spirit, the meditation reached its climax. He opened his eyes and felt it at once, a razor-sharp blade born in the core of his heart, and with it an irresistible drive to draw the sword and strike. This is the true emblem of mastery in the sword Tao. Ye Cheng's heart thundered in his chest. As a dedicated sword cultivator, he recognized the sensation instantly. In a single breath, his eyes flew open, lit by a cold, brilliant radiance that could slice through stars or cleave the sun in two. With a low, resonant shout, he drew the imperial spiritual sword from its scabbard. The blade gleamed like liquid moonlight as he raised it high. Then, with every ounce of his cultivated strength, he drove it downward toward the yawning chasm of buried sword gorge. Crack! The impact shattered the stillness, sending a shockwave that rippled through the air. In that moment, within the depths of his consciousness, the sword intent he had painstakingly forged at last coalesced into perfection. Every fragment of will, every flicker of intent, aligned to form a single, flawless projection, an achievement known only as the perfection of the heavenly sword. Below him, the gorge's rocky floor split open in a jagged scar nearly 1,000 feet long, a spectral echo of the blade's unstoppable force. Had even one witness been near to see it, the martial world would have been thrown into tumult. After all, this was Buried Sword Gorge, the very place where, generations ago, the legendary Sword Tao Emperor met his end. Alone on the precipice, Ye Cheng allowed himself a single, calm breath. His breakthrough was complete. The path ahead, however, would be more perilous than ever. No ordinary sword cultivator, no matter how deeply he grasped sword intent, could so much as scratch an earth sword-level formation. Even an emperor of the same realm would find it impossible to leave a mark. Yet Ye Cheng remained perfectly composed. He let his gaze linger on the sword imprint he had just crafted, a testament to his newly refined skill, and allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. "Who knows what challenges lie ahead," he murmured, "but this surge in my swordsmanship alone has made the journey to the ancient battlefield more than worth the price." With that, he turned to leave Sword Burial Gorge. And then, a subtle pulse in his chest stopped him. Huh? From the gorge's depths came a faint, stirring aura, as if his blade had awakened some sleeping remnant hidden beneath the rubble. Until now, those residual energies had been nothing more than a hazy afterimage, perceptible only because of his extraordinary divine thought and the insights granted by his chaotic sword body. But in that moment, the lingering sword intent sharpened, becoming clearer by countless degrees and revealing secrets he had never before imagined. Ye Cheng's fingers hovered over the swirling sword intent, the distilled essence of the great sword sage who had fallen here, the fabled sword emperor of the human race. This was the crown jewel of the Burial Sword Gorge's legacies, and Ye Cheng treasured it above all else. He could almost taste the sage's refined techniques, honed over a lifetime of battle. As he focused, the once murky patterns of sword energy snapped into crust, talon clarity. The obstacle that had plagued his comprehension all this time seemed to dissipate in an instant. Excitement flared in Ye Cheng's eyes. Without a moment's hesitation, he settled into a cross-legged posture on the highest platform and closed his eyes. Drawing the Emperor's sword intent into his own spirit, he dove into meditation. He felt, for the first time, the real possibility of forging a flawless sword heart right here, within the hallowed depths of Burial Sword Gorge. Beyond the platform, dozens of fellow cultivators pressed forward, each coveting a fragment of the gorge's legendary sword intent. But the instant they recognized Ye Cheng's claim to the prime seat, their eagerness soured to disappointment. None dared challenge him. One by one they backed away, silent and resentful. In Burial Sword Gorge, the whispers of the departed sword sage still lingered. and tonight they would speak only to Ye Cheng. No one here dared draw steel and duel over mere prestige. After all, respect for the sages still held firm. Yet they all agreed that the real prize lay elsewhere. "See that high platform?" someone murmured, eyes fixed on the weathered stone dais perched midway up the gorge wall. From its vantage, even if you study from below, you can almost touch the sword scar left by the supreme technique in ages past. At the mention of that legendary blade imprint, every sword cultivator who had ventured into Burial Sword Gorge let out a hush of awe. They recalled how Ye Cheng himself had carved that colossal mark not long ago, its jagged grooves still humming with residual power. Standing before it, each disciple felt both humbled and inspired by the magnitude of a single stroke unleashed by true mastery. Chapter 155. "It's beyond belief," one cultivator whispered, eyes fixed on the shimmering groove carved into the cliff face. "Whoever left this sword imprint must have reached the Earth Sword Realm at least." "Earth Sword Realm?" another scoffed. "Look at how perfectly that mark has endured countless ages. Only someone who's mastered the heavenly sword could leave such an enduring trace." A third bowed his head in reverent awe. "My spiritual sword bows before this sword intent. There's no doubt, this was the work of a heavenly sword sage. It's absolutely mesmerizing." Surrounded by murmurs of admiration, the group leaned closer to study the deep, intricate slash etched into Burial Sword Gorge. To them, it was a priceless relic, a testament to a peerless master's power. From his vantage point on the central platform, Ye Cheng watched them with quiet amusement. Sage-level prowess? Millennia-old sword marks? He shook his head and let out a soft chuckle. "Let them have their fun," he muttered. "They're only giving themselves more reasons to believe their own tall tales." In truth, the sword intent he'd left here was no less formidable than that of any renowned sword cultivator in the gorge. If anything, it surpassed them. Their overblown theories only confirmed how exceptional his technique really was. Ye Cheng shut down his 5 mortal senses, leaving only his divine awareness on guard, and delved completely into deciphering the sword intent lingering in Buried Sword Gorge. As he sank deeper into meditation, the faint imprint of his sword energy began to pulse through the valley, and cultivators picked up on it almost at once. Word spread like wildfire. One swordsman sensed it, then 10, then 100, until an ever-growing tide of sword cultivators streamed into the gorge. Each disciple formed a circle around the glowing sword mark, founder posturing into seclusion. None would budge. They treated this residual aura as if it were the greatest treasure in the world. By and by, murmurs rose among them. "Isn't that Jian Rushuang's signature sword seal? Could she really be here to study this imprint herself?" A hush fell over the assembled crowd as a lone figure stepped forward from the shadows. She moved with effortless grace, her face flawless and pale as a snow lotus blooming on Tianshan, emanating a stillness that hushed all blasphemous thoughts. Cradled in her arms was an ancient, unadorned spirit sword, its runes faint but unmistakable. Her flowing white robes shimmered in the cavern's dim light, and every sword cultivator, whether they knew her name or only whispered legends, parted respectfully to let her pass. In that charged silence, even Ye Cheng felt the gravity of her presence. Jian Rushuang had come, not as a rival to fight, but to unravel the very sword intent he himself was striving to comprehend. As Jian Rushuang swept past them, an overwhelming surge of sword intent washed through the minds of the onlookers, like kneeling before a sovereign. Not one of them dared rise above the slightest hint of deference. "Who is this Jian Rushuang?" an elderly sword cultivator whispered hoarsely. Although his own sword intent had long since attained the pinnacle of human sword perfection, he lacked the nerve to even draw his blade in her presence. "That's Jian Rushuang," another cultivator replied, his voice trembling with awe. "She's the daughter of the current emperor of the Beiming sword sect, and the foremost swordswoman across all 3,000 realms of southern Shenzhou. She's already broken through to the imperial realm." The first man continued in a hushed tone. "And that's not all. Despite having cultivated for just over 20 years, she's mastered the profound mysteries of the Earth Sword." "What Earth Sword?" the stunned group echoed. Chapter Text, the Earth Sword Realm. The moment those words left her mouth, the assembled sword cultivators went utterly silent. A tangible shock rippled through the crowd as everyone turned to stare at Jian Rushuang, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and awe. She's only just broken into the earth realm of sword cultivation? Someone stammered, voice trembling. But the earth sword realm is said to be mastered only by the supreme giants of the venerable realm. A veteran swordswoman in the front row, an obvious admirer of Jian Rushuang, shook her head, a self-assured smile playing on her lips. "Don't let that surprise you," she declared. "Jian Rushuang isn't just the top swordsman in the southern 3,000 realms. Put her anywhere in all of Shenzhou, and she's an unrivaled prodigy. She's already ranked 66th on the Shenzhou Earth list." 66th? The murmurs swelled through the crowd like a rising tide. In Shenzhou, a vast expanse of countless realms, the Earth list records young Emperor Realm masters under the age of 100. Above it stands the Heaven list, reserved for the elder titans of the Emperor Realm. To be listed at all is an honor. To be ranked 66th at such a tender age was nothing short of extraordinary. Ye Cheng, standing a short distance away, watched the exchange with calm detachment. A subtle glimmer of interest lit his dark eyes, but his face betrayed no surprise. He had come here not as a spectator, but as a challenger. Today's contest was to test his own skill against one of Shenzhou's brightest stars. At that moment, Jian Rushuang stepped forward, her posture straight and confident. The sky seemed to hush around her, as if in deference to her presence. Her sword, an ethereal blade that shimmered with faint earthen hues, rested lightly in her hand. "Master Ye Cheng," she greeted him, voice clear and steady. "I look forward to our duel." A ripple of anticipation ran through the crowd. Two of the youngest genius swordsmen in the Earth realm, about to cross blades before thousands of eyes. The tension was electric. Ye Cheng offered a courteous nod, drawing his own sword. Its steel surface seemed to flicker with hidden power. "As do I, Miss Jian. May the best swordsman win." With that, they assumed their stances. The air between them crackled as onlookers leaned forward, breath held. In an instant, the duel would begin, and with it, the blades of two rising titans would carve a new legend into the annals of Shenzhou. Typically, the prodigies who make the Earth list are already standing in the Heavenly Emperor realm. Yet, here is Jian Rushuang, still only at the Xuanhuang realm, who not only earned a spot on that list, but soared straight to 76th place. That single fact speaks volumes. Her killing intent is so overwhelming, it can sweep aside heavenly emperors and threaten even the great figures of the divine emperor realm. As Jian Rushuang stood there, the assembled sword cultivators could only stare in awe. Younger disciples gazed at her with reverence, their eyes shining with admiration. Jian Rushuang, however, paid them no heed. Her attention was entirely captured by the colossal sword imprint hovering before her. Even her clear, beautiful eyes widened in shock at the display of such extraordinary power. The other sword cultivators present all sensed it immediately. Whoever had left these slashes must have reached at least the heavenly sword miner's success. But Jian Rushuang saw through it at a glance. This was no ordinary minor success mark. Her own sect, the Beiming Sword Sect, was led by an Emperor Realm giant who had mastered the heavenly sword. Yet the sword intent radiating from these strokes far exceeded even her masters. It wasn't just beyond heavenly sword minor success. It surpassed heavenly sword great success. This was the work of someone who had culminated their training at the very apex of the heavenly sword realm. Awe and longing swelled in Jian Rushuang's chest. She burned to meet in person the legendary swordsman who'd carved out such might and grace with a single blade. But that hope was tinged with sorrow. Perhaps this peerless predecessor had fallen in some ancient war and left the world long ago. With a respectful bow to the departed sage, Jian Rushuang settled into a cross-legged stance. Eyes closed, mind empty, she began her retreat, seeking to absorb and comprehend every ounce of the transcendent sword intent lingering in the air. Jian Rushuang sensed it immediately. The sword imprint etched before her was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If she could truly tap into its power, her own sword intent might soar to new heights, perhaps even shatter the barrier into the realm of earth sword perfection, the pinnacle she had yearned for. Settling into a cross-legged stance, she closed her eyes and drew a long, steady breath. Buzz! An invisible aura rippled out, dissipating the lingering mist that had long cloaked the ancient sword marks. As the haze cleared, the faint tracings of countless sword strikes, so subtle they'd once required both patience and skill to perceive, flared into view. More than that, the very currents of the great sword Tao weaving between heaven and earth became unmistakable. With each passing moment, the difficulty of comprehension eased, allowing her to drink deeply from the gorge's hidden wisdom. At that precise instant, Ye Cheng, who had sealed his 5 senses and was engrossed in his own meditation, probing the mysterious sword intent of the buried sword gorge, noticed the shift. He raised a single brow, breaking his concentration. His eyes opened slowly, fixing on Jian Rushuang below. A curious gleam danced in his pupils as he squinted against the brightening aura. "This young swordswoman's fate is intriguing," he murmured to himself. With his gaze sharpening, the threads of Jian Rushuang's destiny suddenly wove themselves into crystal-clear patterns before his eyes, revealing secrets that both excited and alarmed him in equal measure. Jian Rushuang's appraisal scroll glowed softly under the torchlight. Name: Jian Rushuang Sect, Beiming Sword Sect Realm, Early Xuanhuang Fate, Orange. Grade 5, Tongshuan Dao Bone Gold. Grade 1, Yunling Sword Heart. At first glance, an orange Grade 5 Tongshuan Dao Bone hardly seems impressive. It offers only a modest boost to comprehension, but paired with a gold Grade 1 Yunling Sword Heart, the results are astonishing. This rare dual fate constitution marks Jian Rushuang as a once-in-a-generation prodigy. According to the sect's records, a cultivator who bears the soul-fusing, Yunling, Sword Heart gains inhuman insight into swordsmanship. His rate of mastering sword intent soars far above that of ordinary disciples. Moreover, as he studies swordplay, a spirit-fusing aura blooms around him, an invisible field that sharpens the minds of nearby cultivators, accelerating their own comprehension of sword intent. Simply by training alongside him day after day, one's sword-fighting talent grows by leaps and bounds. In the history of the Beiming Sword Sect, no one has ever combined these two fates so perfectly. Jian Rushuang's arrival has stirred every hall and courtyard, his potential as boundless as the sword qi he so effortlessly commands. And at the center of it all stands Ye Cheng, the young man whose destiny is now intertwined with this extraordinary genius. Ye Cheng settled into a lotus position amid the half-buried blades of Sword Burial Gorge. Pale sunlight filtered down between the canyon walls, illuminating the weathered hilts and broken sword tips scattered at his feet. He closed his eyes and inhaled slowly, centering himself. The leader of the Beiming Sword Sect is fortunate to have discovered such a promising talent, he thought. A slender figure trembled below him. Jian Rushuang's gaze was fixed on the faintly glowing sword intent he had just left impressed in the earth, a mark still alive with power. Only moments ago, Ye Cheng had been about 90% certain he could cultivate the spiritual sword heart in a single breakthrough. Now, as he felt the surge of its energy within him, he was 100% sure he could ascend all the way to the sword heart realm right here in the gorge. He opened his eyes and allowed a small smile to play at his lips. Jian Rushuang's face betrayed her surprise as the residual sword intent seeped into her mind. "Sometimes," he called down softly, "you don't have to force yourself to grasp every bit of sword intent at once. Begin at the edges. Pick one corner of the pattern to understand first, then let your insight expand outward until the whole design comes into focus." Jian Rushuang nodded, settling her breath. The sword mark at her feet pulsed gently, still fresh with his imprint. Ye Cheng watched her quietly, convinced that in this silent gorge, among the relics of countless fallen blades, they were both on the brink of mastering a power that would reshape the future of the Beiming Sword Sect. Ye Cheng studied the glowing sword mark before him, every inch of it brimming with a terrifying sword intent. Even if a giant who'd broken through to the Shenhuang or Shenghuang realm tried to absorb that lethal energy all at once, their spirit sea would fracture under the pressure. And yet here stood someone bold, or foolish, enough to question Jian Rushuang's talent. "How dare you belittle Jian Rushuang like that?" Ye Cheng's voice rang out, sharp as drawn steel. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Chapter 156. When Ye Cheng spoke, the sword cultivators gathered below froze in their tracks. They looked up at him with wide-eyed incredulity. Did he really just say that? One of them scoffed. He actually thinks he can teach the South Sword Empress about sword intent? Isn't he the fellow who barely beat us here, scored the highest purely by luck, and then claimed this premium spot? Another chimed in. Does he really believe that sitting on a higher platform makes him our equal? He's so arrogant, a third muttered. He hasn't the slightest clue what he's talking about. These cultivators had already resented Ye Cheng for grabbing the best viewing seat. Now, watching him presume to correct Jian Rushuang, the emperor of North Ming's own daughter, they openly sneered. An elderly warrior shook his head in disbelief, then raised his voice to carry up to the platform. "Young man," he called, "you do well to curb your arrogance. Do you truly believe you can lecture the North Ming emperor's daughter on her swordsmanship?" Ye Cheng met the old swordsman's glare coolly, his expression unflinching. The crowd below bristled, certain they had exposed a pretender, an inexperienced upstart whose luck had run out. But atop the platform, Ye Cheng's calm resolve betrayed none of the conflict stirring among the spectators. The contest was only just beginning, and neither contempt nor doubt would deter him from his purpose. You should know that even Yuan-Tai's swordmaster, who has cultivated through the 3,000 realms and reached the Earth Sword realm centuries ago, admits he isn't as skilled as the Northern Ming Emperor's daughter. The old master chuckled, then pointed a crooked finger at Ye Cheng. "And you, boy, how old are you? Do you really think you can stand against someone of Yuan-Tai's caliber?" From the far side of the courtyard, Jian Rushuang's slender brow tightened. Foolish drivel, she thought. Ye Cheng appeared barely a year or two older than herself, though, if he truly were some ancient cultivator in disguise, what would that change? In all of southern Shenzhou, only a handful of masters could teach her swordsmanship. Ye Cheng was plainly not among them. Yet behind her cool composure, a gentle strength remained. Obsessed though she was with the art of the sword, she wielded it as a guardian's tool, never as an instrument of slaughter. She didn't really take Ye Cheng's advice to heart, but she replied softly, "Thank you for your kindness. I respect it, but I follow my own path of swordsmanship. I don't need any instruction." "All right." Ye Cheng shook his head with a gentle smile, taking no offense. After all, his offer had been merely a courtesy and a token of appreciation for the girl's help. If she chose to decline, so be it. He would simply withdraw into seclusion. Noticing his silence, the other sword cultivators below assumed he'd grown embarrassed. They held their tongues, sneered among themselves, and returned to their own meditations. But as the hours passed, something strange began to happen in Buried Sword Gorge. The broken blades, half buried in yellow sand and abandoned on the cliffs, started to vibrate and hum, as though stirred by an invisible hand. It was as if the fragmented swords were awakening at last, sensing the presence of their true master. Then, with a final, resonant tremor, the hum reached its peak, and Ye Cheng, seated on the high platform, opened his eyes. Like a tidal wave of steel, the roar swept through the 10,000-mile Buried Sword Gorge. Every sword cultivator meditating around the sword mark, among them Ye Cheng and Jian Rushuang, snapped out of their trance, eyes flying open in astonishment. "What's happening?" someone whispered, voice trembling. "Are all the broken swords in the gorge ringing?" From the depths of the chasm, 10,000 fractured blades rang out in unison, their clear metallic chorus sounding as if they were paying homage to some unseen king. A cold thrill ran through every cultivator present. Jian Rushuang's pupils constricted, her heart hammering in her chest. As a disciple of the Beiming sword sect, she was no stranger to rare sword phenomena, and this was unlike anything ordinary cultivators could achieve. The others only guessed that the disturbance must originate from those who had broken into a new plane of sword intent deep within the gorge. But Jian Rushuang knew better. She had read ancient Beiming classics that described exactly this kind of supernatural symphony, and she understood the peril and promise it portended. 10,000 swords strike in unison, their resonance fit for an emperor. That's it. A sword elder is forging a true sword heart. What? The sword heart realm. At Jian Rushuang's exclamation, every sword cultivator in Buried Sword Gorge froze. Heads snapped upward, eyes darted in every direction. The sword heart realm? Such a realm was all but myth throughout the 3,000 realms south of Shenzhou, and even across the entire Nanshuan divine continent, few had ever stood on its threshold. Yet here and now, it seemed someone among them was crossing that impossible boundary. "Where is the senior who's broken through to the Sword Heart realm?" someone shouted. Another shook his head in awe. "I don't know." The clang of swords came from every direction, and the sword chi swept the entire gorge like a storm. "There's no telling where they might be hidden." A tense silence fell. Dozens of cultivators strained their senses, scanning crags, alcoves, and mist-shrouded ravines for any hint of the mysterious master. Even Jian Rushuang, his face pale with excitement, pressed forward, searching desperately for the one who had just forged legend into reality. The cultivators spread throughout Buried Sword Gorge paused, exchanging worried glances. No matter how keen their eyes, no one could sense any trace of the fabled Sword Heart. Yet here, where sword will itself thrummed in every gust of wind and pulse of earth, its completion seemed imminent. Then, from the edge of the crowd, a startled voice rang out. "Look, up on the high platform." Everyone's gaze snapped to the lone wooden dais at the gorge's heart. There, standing motionless, was Ye Cheng. His eyes, now wide open, shone with a fierce, ice-cold light, the unmistakable radiance of a perfected sword. A hush fell, broken only by his own low proclamation. "The Sword Heart is complete." Inside Ye Cheng's mind, the primordial sword intent, the force that had once seemed as natural and effortless as breathing, had vanished. In its place, every fragment of divine thought, every drop of spiritual power in his dantian, had transmuted into the keenest sword energy imaginable. With a single flicker of his will, he could cleave heaven from earth. Slowly, deliberately, Ye Cheng lifted one hand, and the assembled cultivators braced themselves for the impossible. As Ye Cheng's spiritual energy crystallized, a low vibration hummed through every corner of Burial Sword Gorge. In an instant, the roar of clashing blades, a sound so fierce it had felt like a tidal wave, fell utterly silent. This eerie stillness, however, was only the calm before the storm. From the high platform above, swords streaked downward like shards of frost. The assembled sword cultivators froze, their minds blank as the air itself seemed to pause. Then, as if struck by an invisible hammer, the gorge erupted in a deafening boom. The next moment they found themselves swallowed by pitch-black darkness. No moon, no stars, nothing but an endless void. And at the very heart of that void stood a single figure, Ye Cheng. He appeared motionless, yet every cultivator present felt the weight of his presence as though it pressed directly on their hearts. In that instant, Jian Rushuang and the others, regardless of rank or realm, understood the terrifying truth. Ye Cheng had become the absolute master of this realm. A mere flicker of his will would consign them all to oblivion within this abyss. This was not ordinary darkness, but the ultimate manifestation of his sword heart, a domain born from his profound resonance with the heavenly sword chi. There was no longer any room for doubt. Ye Cheng's power now transcended mortal boundaries. This was the pinnacle of the Sword Heart realm's power, an achievement only its supreme master could attain. Ye Cheng had fully comprehended the Sword Heart, and now his presence alone seemed to remake the world. "Break!" His voice was soft, barely more than a whisper, yet it sent a shudder through every sword cultivator watching. Even Jian Rushuang felt his heart leap. In that moment, it was as if they had witnessed the chaos god itself cleaving open creation. At the edge of the suffocating darkness, Ye Cheng lifted his spirit blade high. Then, with a single decisive stroke, he brought it down. A blinding arc of light ripped through the void, banishing the blackness and revealing once more the azure sky and the vast sweep of Buried Sword Gorge. But no one lifted their gaze to the heavens. All eyes were drawn to the gorge floor beneath Ye Cheng's strike. There, beside the ancient scar left when he first grasped the heavenly sword, a fresh slash had appeared. This new cut pulsed with power, spreading outward in a brilliant seam that extended without end, carving straight toward the distant rim of the canyon. In that moment, every onlooker knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, the boundless reach of Ye Cheng's sword heart made manifest. It stretched for over 1,000,000 feet, a perfect arc of blinding light cleaving the sky. Every sword cultivator below felt their hearts skip a beat, awed beyond words. Then one of them shivered and blurted out, "Wait, Something's wrong. Head snapped toward him. What do you mean? Someone demanded. The cultivator swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the glowing scar above. Look at that second sword mark, its lingering aura. It's identical to the first one we studied. A ripple of astonishment swept through the crowd. Even Jian Rushuang lifted her gaze, shock blazing in her eyes. Moments later, her pupils constricted. He's right, she whispered. She raised her voice so all could hear. Both sword marks were made by the same person, by that senior on the high platform, Ye Cheng. Chapter 157. A hush fell over the gathered sword cultivators as they each drew in a cold, involuntary breath. All eyes were fixed on Ye Cheng, who stood composed atop the high platform. Their minds reeled. Until just moments ago, none of them would have believed that the breathtaking sword mark they'd witnessed could have come from anyone but a legendary sword sage of ancient battlefields. Yet here he was, the very man they had long looked down upon. A wave of shame swept through the crowd. Those who had sneered at Ye Cheng now felt their cheeks burn with embarrassment. Many longed to vanish on the spot. Whispers ran like wildfire. That sublime sword form, could it really be the work of a junior disciple? No, impossible. It must have been cut by our senior. At the front of the assembly, Jian Rushuang's whole body trembled. She stared up at Ye Cheng, her lips parting in awe, eyes shining with an emotion she could barely comprehend. In that instant, no one was more profoundly shocked than she was. Jian Rushuang, a proud disciple of the Beiming sword sect, stood among her fellow sword cultivators in Burial Sword Gorge, her eyes locked on the solitary figure atop the high platform. Though his face was calm and composed, she could feel the crushing weight of his power, and yet he could be barely older than herself. A prodigy of her own generation had truly broken through to the sword heart realm? The very thought sent a shiver through her. Such talent was almost inconceivable. Below her, every cultivator had gone silent, their minds still reeling from the two perfectly carved sword marks that had split the ancient cliff face. To them, it had been a dazzling, impossible feat, but to the young man on the platform, it had been nothing more than a stepping stone, a casual demonstration of his own progress. His name, Ye Cheng, was already whispered on every lip, yet his expression betrayed no pride, only serene detachment. Once he felt the last echoes of sword intent dissipate into the gorge, Ye Cheng bowed his head in a silent salute to the countless sword spirits that had aided his breakthrough. With that gesture of gratitude complete, he turned to descend the platform, his black robes stirring like ink in dark water. At that moment, Jian Rushuang's voice trembled through the still air. "Senior, please, don't leave." Ye Cheng paused and glanced back, his dark eyes calm but curious. Jian Rushuang hurried forward, tears glinting at the corners of her eyes, and bowed deeply. "Senior, your counsel earlier, I failed to appreciate its value. I humbly ask you to stay and teach me." A hush fell over the gorge as Ye Cheng regarded her for a long, quiet moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, he inclined his head. "I don't know where I stand. I'm sorry for my offense." Jian Rushuang's apology was genuine, and she immediately regretted having dismissed Ye Cheng's earlier advice. "It was just an offhand remark. Don't worry about it," Ye Cheng said lightly. He truly wasn't offended. He had offered guidance simply out of goodwill. Whether Jian Rushuang accepted it was up to her. The opportunity was there. If she wanted it, she could take it. If not, he wouldn't mind. Hearing his calm indifference, Jian Rushuang felt an even sharper pang of regret. If only she'd heeded him before, she might already be training in swordsmanship under his tutelage. The chance had slipped through her fingers, until, at that moment, she remembered his words. A spark of determination lit her heart. "Perhaps it isn't too late," she whispered to herself. Then, lifting her head, she said in a rush, "Senior, now that I've seen your skill, I would be honored if you'd teach me swordsmanship." "May I become your disciple?" Jian Rushuang asked, her voice steady. Ye Cheng raised a single brow. "And what skill do you have that deserves my approval?" Jian Rushuang drew a measured breath and fixed her gaze on the colossal sword mark Ye Cheng had cut into the floor of the Burial Sword Gorge. Remembering his counsel, she stopped trying to allow the entire diagram at once. Instead, she focused on just 1/10 of its pattern, breaking the complex form into manageable fragments. Almost immediately, the dormant sword intent embedded in the mark began to stir. Within her consciousness, a faint vibration grew into a humming resonance, as though the blade itself were waking from slumber. Then, with a sharp crack that echoed through the chasm, the energy exploded to life. In the echoing silence that followed, Jian Rushuang slipped her hand to her sword's hilt and drew it in a single fluid motion. She brought the blade down across the gorge's stone floor, and the result was breathtaking. 100-foot-long arc scored the cavern, glowing faintly with residual intent. A hush fell over the onlookers. Though her new mark was modest beside Ye Cheng's 2 great runes, it far surpassed anything they had ever seen in the burial sword gorge. Whispers of astonishment rippled through the gathered cultivators. Ye Cheng regarded her quietly for a moment, then inclined his head ever so slightly. The faintest suggestion of a smile touched his lips. "Your foundation is solid," he said at last. "Very well. If you can sustain such precision and strength through every fraction of that pattern, you may call yourself my disciple." Jian Rushuang's heart leapt. With a determined nod, she sheathed her sword. The challenge was set, and the path before her clear. 100-foot-long sword mark stretched across the battlefield, a clear sign that Jian Rushuang's sword intent had ascended to earth sword perfection. "Did she just shatter the realm of sword intent?" one spectator gasped. "Remarkable, truly golden words," another exclaimed. "In a single phrase, she's broken through the bottleneck that's plagued the Northern Sea's finest swordswoman." All across Buried Sword Gorge, sword cultivators had watched Jian Rushuang's breakthrough unfold in real time. They admired her prodigious talent, but their astonishment was matched by a growing respect for Ye Cheng, whose simple instruction had prompted the leap. Jian Rushuang herself stood speechless, her eyes alight with wonder. She had grasped the essence of Ye Cheng's guidance in broad strokes, yet she never imagined it contained such a profound level of sword meaning perception. Even that weakened imprint of his sword mark had been enough to carry her to earth sword great perfection. If merely 1/10 of his insight could propel her this far, what might she achieve by comprehending it in full? True earth sword perfection, or perhaps even the legendary heaven sword. Jian Rushuang stifled her excitement and turned back to face Ye Cheng. She looked up at him with eyes shining in equal parts gratitude and hope, gratitude for everything he'd taught her, and hope that he would formally accept her as his disciple. But Ye Cheng's reply was quiet and unyielding. "Your talent is impressive, but it's not enough." His words fell like ice water over Jian Rushuang's aspirations. All around them, the other sword cultivators froze in shock. Here stood the emperor's daughter of the Beiming sword sect. Every master would eagerly welcome her as a disciple, forging a powerful connection to her clan. Whoever took her on would instantly gain the Beiming sect as an ally. Yet Ye Cheng had turned her down so calmly, so decisively. Still, as the onlookers remembered his previous displays of swordsmanship, the effortless precision, the razor-sharp focus, they couldn't quite bring themselves to fault him. If anyone could judge talent fairly, it was Ye Cheng. His refusal, though cold, felt rooted in confidence rather than arrogance. "He's absolutely unparalleled," the onlookers whispered in hushed awe. "Someone like him must have the backing of the emperor's sect, or even the imperial palace itself. Even if he's just a casual cultivator, once word of his sword realm mastery spreads, the emperor's sect will be begging him to serve as a senior elder." Jian Rushuang, stung by his polite refusal, forced back a rueful smile. Only moments ago, she'd taken pride in her own breakthrough into the sword realm. Her talent and achievements were no small thing, but what were they beside someone like him? He was her peer in age, yet his accomplishments dwarfed hers and those of every other swordmaster present. The bar he'd set for accepting disciples had to lie far beyond her reach. As Ye Cheng turned to leave, her heart pounded. She bit her lip, determination igniting in her eyes. Some opportunities come only once. Let this slip away, and regret will follow forever. "Senior," she called out, her voice clear and unwavering. "I know my talent can't match your current disciples, but I'm willing to follow you, and even serve as your sword slave. Could you please provide the full chapter text you'd like me to rewrite? Once I have the complete passage, I'll polish it into clear, idiomatic English, and ensure Ye Cheng is consistently characterized as a male. Chapter 158. Jian Rushuang's words echoed through the cavern. This moment on, I swear to serve as Ye Cheng's sword slave. A stunned hush fell over the sword cultivators gathered in Buried Sword Gorge. The daughter of the North Ming sword sect, renowned for her unshakable pride, had just offered herself as an attendant to a fellow swordsman, effectively becoming his sword slave. Even if that swordsman was a rare sword king and feared by all as a peerless villain, her choice was astonishing. Ye Cheng himself raised an eyebrow, surprise flickering in his dark eyes as he regarded Jian Rushuang. After a thoughtful pause, his gaze flicked downward to the translucent panel of her character attributes floating at her side. It had once read, Fate, Gold, First Grade, Soul-Enriching Sword Heart. But now, following her breakthrough to the Earth Sword Realm, it quietly shifted to Fate, Gold, Second Grade, Soul-Enriching Sword Heart. The name of her destiny hadn't changed, only its tier had risen, and with it, its potency. A growing fate? Ye Cheng murmured under his breath, intrigue lighting his expression. At Gold First Grade, the soul-enriching Sword Heart had granted only a modest boost after his own ascent into the Sword Heart realm. A second-grade destiny, however, promised far greater power and far greater potential for both master and servant alike. If the soul-enriching Sword Heart could press on and break through once more, everything would change. Even with Ye Cheng's prodigious gift for the blade, after forging the Sword Heart, his rate of improvement had slowed, and he needed an outside catalyst to push him further. Disciple. Ye Cheng glanced at Jian Rushuang, then met the determined spark in the Northern Ming Emperor's daughter's eyes. He inclined his head. Very well, follow me and show me what you can do. If you impress me, I will formally accept you as my disciple once we leave this ancient battlefield. Thank you, Your Highness. Jian Rushuang's voice quivered with excitement as she bowed deeply. Ye Cheng scratched his nose and added with a wry smile, And there's no need for senior. Just call me Your Highness. Jian Rushuang stiffened, then recovered herself. Yes, Your Highness. Her heart thundered with anticipation. She'd been right all along. This Highness really was a peerless genius of her generation. Am I seeing things, or what? This is the North Sea Emperor's daughter. She only came in as a backup follower. So why is she celebrating like she's won the lottery? The sword cultivators clustered in Buried Sword Gorge exchanged incredulous glances as they watched Jian Rushuang walk beside Ye Cheng, grinning as though she'd scored an unimaginable prize. They rubbed their eyes in disbelief. Jian Rushuang merely smiled, unperturbed. She was absolutely certain that Ye Cheng's future feats would shatter every expectation across the 3,000 realms. When that day came, everyone here would understand just how wise they were to pledge their allegiance to him. Ye Cheng paid no mind to their murmurs. Once they'd cleared the gorge, he closed his eyes, releasing his divine consciousness to sweep the area for hidden treasures. Thanks to the blessing of the heavenly refining saint body, his spiritual perception knew no bounds, far exceeding even the supreme giants of the venerable realm. Despite the ancient battlefield's innate barriers designed to suppress cultivators' divine senses, Ye Cheng's awareness still stretched a full 1,000 miles. Probing the lingering chi currents, he swiftly zeroed in on his prize. Well, would you look at that? Today's my lucky day, he murmured with a half-smile. His eyes glimmered with excitement as he confirmed the source of the disturbance. In the southeastern corner lay a hidden valley brimming with spiritual herbs. There were no 7th-grade imperial medicines here, but the abundance of 6th-grade specimens was more than enough. With these, he could refine a 6th-grade elixir on par with the venerable realm, bringing Empress Eng's revival that much closer. He turned to his companion. Jian Rushuang, you take the northern edge of the valley and see what you can find. I'll head south and gather every usable herb. With a firm nod exchanged between them, the two set off in opposite directions, their figures swiftly swallowed by the valley's mist. Meet me at the heart of the valley. Do you copy? With a single thought, Ye Cheng touched Jian Rushuang's brow, imprinting the exact coordinates of the meeting point. Startled, Jian Rushuang froze, awed by the sheer force of her prince's will. In an instant, she regained her composure, nodded, and acknowledged the order. Together they surged upward on their cultivation energy before plummeting into the valley below. Below, dozens of wandering cultivators, mostly monks harvesting rare spiritual herbs, scattered among the crags and terraces. Jian Rushuang touched down gracefully at the valley's northern rim, and Ye Cheng followed, landing a few strides beyond her. At first, their arrival barely registered, but a sudden ripple of energy stirred everyone's curiosity, even those near the southern entrance who strained their senses to pinpoint the disturbance. In moments, a crowd began to gather. Whispers rose like wind through the pine trees. That must be the North Ming Emperor's daughter, Jian Rushuang. She's renowned as the foremost young swordswoman across the 3,000 realms south of Shenzhou. I hear she's already broken through into the Xuanhuang realm. All eyes turn northward, awaiting her next move. Ye Cheng, unmoved by the growing spectacle, simply stood at her side, his calm presence an unspoken reminder of why everyone here would soon bow to their will. With the blessing of the Earth Sword, not even someone at Xuanhuang perfection could stand against her. Such overwhelming power, Beiming Sword Sect has truly unearthed a treasure. All across the valley, cultivators from every major school, some even from the venerable imperial sect, paused in amazement at the sight of Jian Rushuang. Yet she remained cool and composed, her expression unreadable. Obedient to her prince's instructions, she knelt and began harvesting the rare spirit herbs he had specified. On the far side of the valley, Ye Cheng mirrored her diligence, methodically gathering his own collection of precious plants. Then, from the northern rim of the gorge, a small group of imperial sect disciples who had recognized Jian Rushuang exchanged hurried glances. In unison, they crushed their communication talismans. Moments later, a brilliant arc of colored light soared across the sky. From within that luminous rainbow came a single fervent cry. Rushuang? Rushuang has arrived. Look, the Lord of the Five Spirit Palace has arrived. Ha! He's always swooning over Princess Jian Rushuang. At once, the courtyard fell into a ripple of whispers. A tall figure swathed in a flowing, multicolored robe strode in, none other than the Emperor's nephew, the proud lord of the Five Spirit Palace, and an infamous admirer of the Emperor's only daughter. Yet when he called out to Rushuang, she didn't even turn her head. His eager smile faltered into awkward reserve, and though he forced his expression into courteous interest, everyone could see his cheeks flush with embarrassment. Still, as he watched Jian Rushuang's graceful form and recalled the court elder's praise of her unparalleled talent, his disappointment shifted into fierce determination. Someday soon, he vowed, he would make her his. And in that moment, all the indifference she'd shown him today would seem like nothing more than a sweet memory. Masking his true intentions behind a polished facade, he fell into step behind her, determined to win her over at any cost. Yet, even as he followed, a faint sliver of doubt began to flicker in his mind. Boom! Just as the Five Spirits Emperor closed in on Jian Rushuang, a brilliant arc of sword energy shot skyward from behind her. Instantly, it forged a rift of 100 feet between them, barring him from advancing any further. That sword aura, it's overwhelming, murmured one onlooker. I could swear Jian Rushuang's sword mastery has just taken another leap, another whispered, eyes wide. Even the Five Spirits Emperor, initially snarling with irritation, froze in place, surprise and a flicker of greed dancing in his gaze as he stared at Jian Rushuang. But before anyone could react further, a commotion erupted from the southern end of the valley. Who's that young man? Does he think this place is open to trespassers? Barked a king-rank cultivator, his voice icy. Dozens of other experts in the king realm turned, their expressions hardening into murderous resolve. Bathed in moonlight stood a lone sword cultivator, garbed in white, Ye Cheng. Calm and unyielding, he scanned the circle of hostile faces. None could have guessed that this unassuming youth, so fiercely defending Jian Rushuang, wielded such formidable power. Yet here he was, daring to gather spiritual herbs in a valley ruled by the Five Spirits Emperor, and ready to fight anyone who challenged him. Amid the rising din of scorn and outrage, Prince Ye Cheng remained perfectly composed. Even as the cultivators surrounding him hurled insults, he calmly reached down, plucked the half-open spirit flower at his feet, and slipped it into his storage pouch. His unshakable poise only fueled the crowd's fury. Who does this brat think he is? One senior disciple spat. Which sect dares to show such arrogance? This valley isn't unclaimed land, another bellowed. Yunlong sect, Wenyue sect, Wuling Imperial Palace, 13 great powers each stake their claim here. Who gave you permission to trespass and harvest spiritual herbs? A third voice cut in with cruel laughter. He doesn't resemble any emperor's son or noble young master we know. He's a nobody from some backwater clan. Let's make an example of him. Teach him not to overstep next time. At that, a burly cultivator stepped forward, eyes ablaze with murderous intent, blade already sliding free from its sheath. Suddenly, a streak of white light flashed across the clearing. Princess Jian Rushuang. Heart-pounding, she vaulted into the circle of cultivators and came to a skidding halt before the would-be attacker. "Back off," her voice rang out like a gong. "One more step and you'll answer to me." For a heartbeat, silence fell. The 13 sect's disciples exchanged uncertain glances as Princess Jian's fierce glare pinned them in place. Even the burly cultivator hesitated, blade trembling in his hand. Prince Ye Cheng offered her a faint nod of thanks, his expression as calm as ever, while the assembled crowd reeled from the sudden turn of events. The valley, once simmering with impending violence, now held its breath, waiting to see whether these two royal figures would be defended or silenced. Jian Rushuang's eyes went cold, her gaze as sharp as a drawn blade. With a single, silent gesture, she unleashed a blinding arc of sword chi. Boom! The torrent of radiant energy roared like a tidal wave, tearing through earth and sky. Wherever it passed, the very void trembled and hummed under its murderous weight. The Xuanhuang realm cultivator opposite her, whose strength matched hers, stood frozen. His most carefully constructed defenses shattered like glass, unable to withstand the onslaught. In one decisive stroke, Jian Rushuang's swordlight cleaved him in two, sending him hurtling backward in a spray of blood. He collapsed to the ground, barely clinging to life. Though he had escaped death, the severity of his injuries left no doubt he would never return to full strength. He had already poured every ounce of his strength into that strike, even unleashing the life-or-death trump cards he'd sworn never to use until the final moment. And still he could only rasp out a single, ragged breath. How powerful is the Rushuang Emperor's strength? Someone finally gasped. A heavy silence settled over the valley. All eyes were fixed on the lingering echoes of that immense power. Then slow, lie drifted to Jian Rushuang, who stood calm and unyielding before Ye Cheng. Awe and something deeper, a piercing confusion, shone in their faces. Why, they wondered, was the Emperor himself shielding that lone swordsman in white? Before anyone could speak, Jian Rushuang's voice cut through the stillness, cold and commanding. "Let this be a lesson to any who dare insult or harm His Highness. I, Lu Yunwu, will serve as the first example." "Your Highness." A whisper broke the quiet. "Your Highness?" someone else echoed, disbelief and reverence mingling in their tone. Chapter 159. No one gave another thought to the unfortunate Yunwu Xuanhuang. In the valley, every cultivator stood frozen, their ears ringing from astonishment at what they'd just heard. Jian Rushuang, prized daughter of the Beiming Sword sect, had dared to address the pale-clad swordsman before her as "Your Highness." "Your Highness?" They exchanged incredulous glances. Were they together? What kind of bond demanded such a deferential, intimate title? Whispers rippled through the crowd, growing louder with each passing heartbeat. But the greatest shock of all struck the Five Spirits Emperor. A surge of jealousy roared through him as he watched Rushuang, his cherished goddess, step forward and gesture protectively toward Ye Cheng. The idea of another man receiving her concern, her respect, was unbearable. The Emperor's face twisted with rage. He took a step closer, his voice icy enough to freeze blood in their veins. "Rushuang, who is this man?" At his command, every cultivator in the valley shivered, unwilling and too stunned even to breathe. The air crackled with tension as all eyes turned to Rushuang, awaiting her answer. Only then did everyone remember the other person hiding in the valley and the bond he shared with Jian Rushuang. Their murmurs grew louder as they caught sight of Ye Cheng's striking profile in the distance. Whispers of astonishment and suspicion rippled through the onlookers. Jian Rushuang, however, paid the Five Spirits Emperor's threats no mind. Why should she care about his wrath? She was here solely at Ye Cheng's side. Even if rumors tied them together, What business was it of the Emperor's? Meanwhile, from every direction around the clearing, formidable warriors watched the standoff between the Beiming sword sect and the Five Spirits Imperial Palace. Although none dared wade into their quarrel, every faction had its own designs on the invaluable spiritual herbs Ye Cheng had gathered. No one was ready to relinquish those treasures without a fight. A tall elder from the 13 families stepped forward, his voice cold as mountain ice. "Your Highness Jian Rushuang, we don't deny your friendship with this young man, but let's be clear. Every last spiritual herb and medicinal root in this valley belongs to the 13 families." He swept a hand toward the expectant lines of cultivators behind him, each one a genuine Xuanhuang perfection, far beyond the middle stage Xuanhuang Yunwu. Xuanhuang had achieved. Out of respect for the Beiming sword sect, we'll allow you to take 20% of the harvest. No more, no less. Now, Your Highness, have your friend hand over the remaining herbs and medicine. A whisper of contempt rippled through the assembled perfections. They had no doubt Jian Rushuang would bend to their demands. But Jian said nothing. She stood perfectly still, her gaze unwavering as she looked past the elder to the young man at her side. Ye Cheng met her eyes calmly. His expression gave nothing away. Finally, he spoke in a low, steady tone. "I'm not interested in negotiating." The elder's lips curled into a sneer. Around them, the air seemed to thrum with the power of 13 Xuanhuang perfections ready to enforce their claim. Yet Jian Rushuang and Ye Cheng remained eerily composed, as if they carried a silent threat far more formidable than any demand the 13 families could make. "I want every last spiritual herb in this valley." "Understood." Jian Rushuang responded immediately. She lifted her sword, the steel gleaming in the dim light, and fixed the assembled intruders with a cool smile. "Didn't you hear what our Prince Ye Cheng said? If you withdraw now, your offense can be overlooked. Otherwise." With that, she glided forward in a single step. A booming pulse of power erupted from her, rippling outward like a tidal wave. Every cultivator present paled. Only days ago, Jian Rushuang had shattered the final barrier of her sword technique. Today, she vaulted into the mid-stage of the Xuanhuang realm. The fusion of her sword attainments with her newfound Ilm elevation granted her strength sufficient to rival even Emperor-level masters. Nothing there frightened her. Mid-stage Xuanhuang? She ascended through her realm that fast? Whispers of disbelief ran through the crowd, but admiration swiftly curdled into contempt. "Such strength won't stop us," they roared in unison and surged forward, hundreds of Emperor realm experts charging like a stampede. They never expected Jian Rushuang to stand alone against them and win. As their combined assault struck her defenses, her sword radiated a shockwave so forceful it threw back wave after wave of attackers. Dozens staggered. Many were sent sprawling. The would-be looters found themselves blocked by nothing more than one resolute swordswoman and her indomitable will. Despite over 10 peak-perfect realm experts attacking in unison, none could even graze Jian Rushuang's guard. On the contrary, her every strike drove them backward. All the while, Ye Cheng stood a few paces behind her, utterly unfazed. His sleeves rolled up as he calmly plucked spiritual herbs from the ground. The Five Spirits Emperor's face flushed red with rage. "What a coward! Hiding behind a woman. If you've any courage at all, step forward and face us." His companions joined in the taunt. "That's right, relying on her to do the fighting. So what if you're a man? Are you afraid to show yourself?" A lazy smile curved Ye Cheng's lips as he straightened. He met their jeers with a cool, steady gaze. "All right, you want a fight? I'll give it to you." He shifted his stance, then called softly, "Rushuang, stand down." Jian Rushuang hesitated for a heartbeat, eyes darting in warning, but she obeyed, melting back into the shadows. Ye Cheng drew his blade in one fluid motion. The sword gleamed in the dim light, and the surrounding air quivered with released spiritual energy. Stepping onto the battlefield alone, he prepared to face the angry onslaught. Jian Rushuang spun on his heel, blade flashing in a graceful arc that drove the nearest monks stumbling back. He sheathed his sword with calm assurance, satisfaction brightening his eyes. He had absolute faith in his prince's prowess and felt nothing but pity for these undersized monks, still oblivious to the danger they'd provoked. Across the clearing, the leaders of the 13 sects, above all the notorious Five Spirits Emperor, watched coldly as Ye Cheng stood his ground. Their expressions hardened into stony masks, but none were more lethal than the Five Spirits Emperor himself. Murder glittered in his gaze. "Dare to challenge me for a woman's favor?" he thundered, voice echoing like a war drum. "We'll see how many heads you leave for me to collect." He cut a mocking bow, then flicked a finger toward Ye Cheng. "Seize him." "Yes, your majesty." At once, several grand emperors of the Five Spirits Palace surged forward, their auras crackling as they charged. The air trembled with impending violence as they closed in on Ye Cheng. The cultivators from the rival sects refused to be outdone. With a unified battle cry, they surged forward, unleashing a synchronized assault on Ye Cheng. In the next breath, countless spells rained down like a meteor shower, drenching his position in crackling arcane energy. The sheer force of the onslaught was terrifying. No mere youth could endure it. Even an Emperor Realm Master, let alone a true Xuanhuang, would have been grievously wounded. Under that relentless barrage, Ye Cheng's face went pale. He stood rigid, sword at his side, offering no immediate defense. Yet in the final heartbeat before the star-like spells struck, he lifted his blade. A soft hum rippled through the air as a narrow ribbon of pure white light sprang from the steel. That slender sword light looked hopelessly outmatched, like a lone skiff on a storm-tossed ocean, bound to be shattered by the combined might of the 13 sects and the 5 spirit emperors. However, to the astonishment of every onlooker, the beam did not waver. Instead, it burned ever brighter, slicing through the swirling tempest of magic as though it were nothing more than mist. Just as everyone believed the battle was decided, a thunderous crack rent the magical wave, startling every cultivator. Before they could even recover, a rapid succession of explosions, bang, 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 shook the sky. Through the stunned silence, Ye Cheng's sword light, at first appearing perfectly ordinary, tore forward. Against the combined magical onslaught of powerful sovereigns and masters of the Xuanhuang perfection realm, it advanced unhindered, each spell collapsing like brittle parchment. In one swift motion, his blade's radiance shattered and annihilated every arcane defense in its path. "How can this be?" gasped the leaders of the 13 sects, their voices trembling with disbelief. Even those who had mocked Ye Cheng, among them the 5 spirit emperor's son and the disciples of his palace, stood speechless, their hearts pounding as they stared at the almost tangible glow of that unstoppable sword beam. The pale arc of golden light tore through the air, ripping apart every magical ward the 13 sects had hastily erected. Its power remained undiminished, an unstoppable force bearing down on them. "Run! Save yourselves!" someone screamed. Jian Rushuang's eyes shone with stunned reverence, while the monks clustered behind him stared in glazed disbelief. The 5 spirit emperor and his entourage, finally shaken from their shock, spun on their heels and fled in terror, but it was already too late. In a single, merciless surge, the swordlight struck. Ye Cheng's effortless blow consumed the 5 spirit emperor and nearly 2/3 of the sect's mightiest warriors in one blinding flash. When the radiance at last faded, only a scarred, lifeless plain remained. The survivors stood frozen, their faces ashen, as if they had witnessed a ghost pass through the world. Chapter 160. Is there anyone left among you brave enough to challenge me? Ye Cheng's voice carried cold indifference as he stood amid the ruined valley. The survivors fell into a stunned silence. The few monks still alive trembled so violently that they could only collapse to their knees. All pride and courage had drained from them. One of the elder monks finally choked out an apology, his voice quavering with terror. "Senior, we have been blind to your greatness. Please, forgive our ignorance." They spoke through clenched teeth and tears of regret. Only a moment ago, they had dismissed this man as nothing more than a pampered fop, a hanger-on who hid behind a powerful woman. Now their eyes told a different story. With a single sword, Ye Cheng had annihilated 13 sects at once, wiping out nearly 2/3 of the valley's most formidable cultivators. Among the fallen were more than 10 Xuanhuang perfected masters. Such lethal prowess exceeded even the might of a typical Tianhuang cultivator, let alone one at the perfection level. Their cowardice was plain to see. They had been blind, yes, but no longer. A young disciple from the imperial palace knelt a few paces behind the monks, His heart hammered in his chest as he stared at Ye Cheng, pupils wide with disbelief. The man before him was no mere dilettante. In that hard, unwavering gaze, the disciple saw boundless power and an unshakable resolve. Ye Cheng's sword, still sheathed, gleamed ominously in the pale mountain light. He surveyed the broken ranks of the valley's survivors, annoyance flickering across his face. "If you value your lives," he said softly, "you will cease your plotting and be gone. Do not force me to strike again." No one dared move. The valley lay in ruins. The monks were at his mercy. And they all knew there was only one answer. They would flee before this unstoppable force. Above them, the wind carried away the echoes of slaughter and left behind a chilling promise that whoever crossed Ye Cheng next would meet the same fate. Unlike the unfortunate disciples of the Five Spirits Imperial Palace, who had all fallen to the wrath of the Five Spirits Emperor, Ye Cheng's own sect had been more cautious. Because they'd shown him some restraint, he and a handful of his fellow students had escaped with their lives. Now, as he stood among those same disciples and several high-ranking masters of the great Tao sect, every eye in the courtyard was fixed on him in terror. They all felt it. Though Ye Cheng appeared barely out of his teens, his true cultivation soared at least to the Heavenly Queen stage, and possibly even to the perfect Heavenly Emperor level. For someone of his age, on the same footing as a prodigy like Jian Rushuang, such a realm was nothing short of extraordinary. With that kind of power, who would dare offend him? Seeing the guilt and shame etched on their faces, Ye Cheng felt no need to say another word. He had already dealt swiftly with those who had provoked him, and utterly crushed the misguided Wuling Imperial Palace. The rest, he decided, were simply not worth the effort. Ye Cheng wasn't a demon. He wasn't about to let these so-called experts hoard all the valley's spiritual herbs and medicines. Brandishing his sword Jian Rushuang, he methodically gathered every stray root, leaf, and pill. After today's decisive battle, no one in the valley would dare cross him again anytime soon. Meanwhile, at the opposite end of the ancient battlefield by the 10,000 Demons Pool, Sheng Jiling burst into the clearing where her oldest friend, Nalan Qingyuan, was waiting. Her eyes glittered with excitement. "Qingyuan, you will never guess what I've seen, the most peerless genius I've ever laid eyes on." Nalan Qingyuan raised an eyebrow, amusement dancing in her voice. "Oh, do tell, what kind of genius has you so tongue-tied? You're practically swooning." Sheng Jiling's cheeks flushed at the teasing, and for a moment her thoughts drifted to the face of the only person who could have impressed her so deeply, Ye Cheng. Now, and Qingyuan caught the sudden change in her friend's expression and narrowed her eyes playfully. "Wait, are you talking about him? Don't jump to conclusions," Sheng Jiling snapped, though her racing heart betrayed her. Anyway, to sum it up, Sheng Jiling's cheeks flushed as she hurriedly waved her hands, signaling Nalan Qingyuan to pause. She hesitated, brows knitting in concentration, then suddenly snapped her fingers once, as though she'd found the perfect way to explain. "The prodigies of our generation at the Yuhang Imperial Palace can't hold a candle to this person." "What?" Nalan Qingyuan's eyes widened in disbelief. "Someone even more exceptional than the princes and princesses of Yuhang Imperial Palace?" She'd always assumed that, despite her own remarkable talent, she still fell short of those imperial heirs. After all, she was the palace's own chosen genius, the one they'd groomed for greatness, the hope of the next generation of cultivators. With the best resources at her fingertips and an innate gift for cultivation, she'd never once doubted that she stood above the chiefs of the 8 spiritual peaks. And yet here was Sheng Jiling, insisting she'd met someone surpassing them all. Could he be the son of the Heaven Guardian sect? Or maybe the Northern Ocean's prodigy, Jian Rushuang? Don't be ridiculous. The Heaven Guardian sect's heir has only just broken into the Emperor realm, hardly more than a rising talent in the south. And as for Jian Rushuang, Sheng Jiling's pulse quickened as she recalled the dossier on Ye Cheng. She leaned closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. Even the Northern Ocean's peerless daughter falls short of him. Nalan Qingyuan's eyes widened. "Jiling, are you absolutely certain?" With the Frost Emperor's own daughter already acclaimed as a marvel, the notion that someone could outshine her sent a thrill through the assembled cultivators. Sheng Jiling met Nalan Qingyuan's gaze, unwavering. I saw it with my own eyes. Ye Cheng slew a fellow Taoist master with a single sword stroke. A stunned hush fell over the crowd. To kill a Taoist of equal rank, simply by the power of his blade, was almost unheard of. Whispers rippled through the courtyard. This young man, whose name few knew, must indeed stand at the very peak of the southern 3,000 realms' younger generation. Nalan Qingyuan's skepticism vanished entirely, replaced by pure astonishment. She turned to her friend. Jiling, do you have any idea where that Taoist swordsman came from? Who is he? Sheng Jiling flushed and shook her head, clearly embarrassed. I honestly don't know. I didn't even catch his name, Qingyuan. She closed her eyes, as if replaying the moment in her mind. All I remember is how effortlessly he cut down that old ghost with a single sword stroke. He was so magnetic. Just thinking about it now makes my heart race. Her cheeks pink, Sheng Jiling sighed dramatically. I, Sheng Jiling, swear I'll never marry, unless it's to someone as peerless and extraordinary as him. Nalan Qingyuan laughed and rolled her eyes. Easy for you to say when you don't even know his name, or if you'll ever see him again. And with his talent, who's to say he'd even consider you worthy? The two friends exchanged a knowing glance and continued on their way, laughter trailing behind them. Boom, boom. Distant energies clashed in the sky, sending aftershocks rippling through the air. Nalan Qingyuan and Sheng Jiling instinctively turned toward the explosions. With a quiet hum, Sheng Jiling's eyes dimmed as she concentrated. A faint spiritual glow blossomed between her brows, forming a delicate blue lotus. In an instant, her divine senses shot dozens of miles away, capturing every detail of the unfolding scene. Nalan Qingyuan watched in fascination. What do you see? What's happening out there? Sheng Jiling broke her focus with a soft exhale, the lotus wilting as her mind returned. When she opened her eyes, they sparkled with astonishment. There's a boy, Ye Cheng. I don't know whose child he is, but he's unbelievably lucky. Nalan Qingyuan's brow furrowed. Lucky? In what way? A thrill ran through Sheng Jiling's voice. He's found a Yumeng mushroom. A Yumeng mushroom? Nalan exclaimed, his heart pounding. Sheng Jiling nodded. A genuine 6th-grade spirit herb, one of the highest-level treasures. Even the supreme masters of the Saint Venerable Realm would give anything to possess it. Nalan Qingyuan stared at the horizon, mind racing. Whoever claimed that mushroom first would hold a fortune in their hands, and all eyes in the realms would soon turn to Ye Cheng. Sheng Jiling's mind raced as she stared at the pale mushroom before her. Even eaten raw, a single Yumeng mushroom could send a condensed cultivator's spirit power soaring. Refined into pills, it could yield countless 6th-grade elixirs capable of restoring the soul and fortifying the mind, a prize for which 1,000-level titans would tear the heavens apart. How did Ye Cheng manage to snatch this without triggering the Yuyun beast? She wondered. In legend, the Yuyun beast and the Yumeng mushroom share an unbreakable bond. Ordinarily, the beast dwells at the Xuanhuang realm, but the moment it devours a fully mature Yumeng mushroom, it explodes to the Venerable Realm in an instant, its mental power rivaling even the greatest human Daozun masters. Fiercely devoted, the Yuyun beast never strays far from its fungal companion. Sheng Jiling shook her head in wonder. There would be time later to unravel how Ye Cheng outwitted such a guardian. Right now, every second counted. The great expanse of the ancient battlefield, known as the Demon Pond, lay silent before them. Legend said it had been formed by a peerless alchemy emperor of the human race, who channeled his supreme divine mind to subdue and refine thousands of demons that once roamed beyond the Venerable Realm. Whether that story was true, no one could now say. Over the centuries, the 10,000 Demon Pond had produced its share of spiritual herbs and medicines, but seldom with potency beyond the 4th or 5th grade, hardly enough to draw the attention of any genuine Venerable Realm powerhouse. Now's our chance, Sheng Jiling whispered, eyes alight with urgency. The Venerable Titans haven't stirred yet. If we hurry, we might still get our hands on the Zongyumeng mushroom. Nalan Qingyuan gave a determined nod. Together, they dashed toward the area Sheng Jiling had sensed. When they arrived, they found themselves facing a throng of cultivators clustered around a single figure, the lucky soul who'd already laid claim to the coveted mushroom. Word of its appearance had spread swiftly, and every opportunist with even a trace of spiritual perception had converged here, hoping to snatch it for themselves. Sheng Jiling watched Ye Cheng's frightened face and couldn't help the pang of sympathy that welled up in her chest. "Poor child," she murmured. How could his parents be so negligent as to let someone this young wander onto an ancient battlefield? He's bound to get himself into serious danger next time. She leaned toward Nalan Qingyuan. "Qingyuan," she whispered, "should we rescue him?" The boy looked so helpless that Sheng Jiling's heart tugged at the thought of leaving him here. But when she glanced back at Nalan Qingyuan, she found him staring at Ye Cheng as though struck by lightning. His eyes, wide with disbelief, didn't leave the boy's trembling form. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. When Nalan Qingyuan finally tore his gaze away, his expression was tangled with surprise and something deeper, conflicted, almost pained. Sheng Jiling cleared her throat softly, waiting for his answer, while Ye Cheng continued to stand at the battlefield's edge, oblivious to the powerful stirrings he had just provoked in these two guardians. She spoke in a low voice, "I don't think we'll get a chance to do anything." Her eyes flicked to the monks encircling the boy clutching the yumeng mushroom at the center, and a faint complexity softened her gaze. "If we're talking about misfortune, the ones who've closed in on this child, planning to strike, are the ones asking for trouble." Sheng Jiling stared at her, utterly bewildered.